Good morning, Senior Minister of State, Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Ministry of National Development, Ms. Sim Ann, RGS Board of Governors Member Professor Lim Soon Hock, Principal of RGS, Ms. Haslinda, Past Principal of RGS, Mrs. Po Man Si, staff of RGS, students of RGS, friends of RGS, and our esteemed speakers and panelists. I'm Bella and I'll be your MC for today. On behalf of everyone in the RGS Alumni Council, I would like to warmly welcome you to the 5th Annual Rafflesian Women's Conference. The music that you have been listening to for the past half an hour was performed and recorded by Tang T. Kun, an RGS alumna and the founder and artistic director of Chamber Music Arts, Singapore. We have so many insightful and brilliant speakers and panelists ready to share their insights with us, so I can't wait to formally kick this conference off. It is my pleasure to invite the chair of the conference, Jeog, to give our official welcoming remarks and to introduce our guest of honor. Jeog was the president of the RGS alumni from 2019 to 2022 and has shaped the foundation and direction of the association from the very start. She has been the force behind RWC and someone I've learned a lot from and look up to. Let us welcome Jeog, please.
Thank you, Bella, for your kind words. I could only do this most fulfilling task and fulfilling work of building up our RGS alumni because of the wonderful teams of EXCO members that I had the privilege and honor to work with throughout the last 10 years. And Bella, you're a big part of it with your creativity, your initiative, and your dedication. Thank you so much. We must have drinking water. It was important for us to make use of every drop of water from the sky. With these visionary words and ensuing actions, our founding father, the late Minister Mentor Lee Kuan Yew, built Singapore into a first world oasis. No other city in the world has a marina in the center, except Venice. Senior Minister of State, Ms. Sim Ann, Professor Lim Soon Hock, member of the RGS Board of Governors, Principal Mrs. Haslinda, Mrs. Po Man Si, Madam Lim Hong Ping, staff of RGS, my fellow RGS alumni, and RGS Sisters at Heart, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, a very warm welcome to our Rafflesian Women's Conference 2023. Thank you. Our marina barrage is a source of water supply for our population. It also serves as a flood control and also a lifestyle attraction. It epitomizes the United Nations Sustainability Development Goal, SDG 11, which is about making cities and human settlements inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. As can be seen, our late Minister Mentor Lee Kuan Yew has the unparalleled foresight in building sustainable communities. So what is sustainability? It is a confluence of environmental, economic, and social sustainability, a balance of environmental resources, economic opportunities, social equality, and making decisions to build a lasting future for our Earth and our communities. This morning, our incredible speakers and panelists will share invaluable insights on the climate crisis, nature-based solutions, sustainable finance, real estate, and food security. In the efforts to drive sustainability, vulnerable communities' human exploitations are seldom discussed in the same breath. This is where the word caring in our theme is brought to bear. Two extraordinary RGS alumni, one with experiences in working on policies and initiatives to support governments in protecting vulnerable people in poverty from violence. The other, a leader in building buddy systems for seniors, helping the underserved with the aim of developing a caring culture as part of the Singapore identity, will share examples of actions taken in the realm of social sustainability. Ladies and gentlemen, you're here this morning because you care. And we hope that the invaluable insights you gleaned from our speakers and panelists at this conference will show us how to do it right for our Mother Earth and our communities. To that end, that sustainability will become part of our societal DNA. On that note, I now declare the conference open. Thank you. It is now my honor and pleasure to invite our guest of honor, Senior Minister of State, Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Ministry of Development, to share her opening remarks. SMS Ms. Sim is just back from China, renewing ties with the provincial and municipal leaders in Zhejiang and Anhui. Her unrelenting efforts in creating caring and sustainable Kampung spirit is legendary among the communities she serves and inspires. Minister Sim Ann. Thank you.
Ms. Jeog, Chair of the RWC, members of the RWC Task Force, Prof. Lim Soon Hock, Ms. Haslinda Zamani, Principal of RGS, our alumni, our students, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. A very good morning to everyone, and it is my great pleasure to be here at the 5th Annual Rafflesian Women's Conference. It's especially wonderful to see so many of the speakers and panelists in school colors, and certainly catching up with one another, it really brings back our school days very vividly. Let me thank Jeog and the RWC Task Force for inviting me to be part of this very meaningful event. I think that the efforts put in by the alumni to create meaningful, fulfilling activities and bringing important content to our RGS community, particularly for the students, I think this is very laudable, and it really shows the strong bonds between our alumni as well as our educators who work tirelessly every day to further the education and to round out our daughters of a better age. The theme for this year, Building a Sustainable Community, Caring for our Environment, our people, and future generations, is very important and timely. This represents a lofty pursuit, but it is not an unattainable one. We have inherited a strong and prosperous Singapore because of the efforts of previous generations. It is now incumbent on us to carry on this work by leveraging on the resourcefulness and creativity of our people to build a vibrant and robust future for us and the future generations. And everyone has a role to play in this endeavor. Just now, we spent a moment thinking about the legacy of our founding Prime Minister, Mr. Lee Kuan Yew. Thank you, Jeog, for mentioning him, because this year is the 100th birth anniversary of Mr. LKY. And on sustainability and the environment, as with many things, he had ideas that were advanced for his time, but he also had the resolve as well as the determination to work together with Singaporeans, to unite everybody under a vision, and to leverage on the strengths of his many colleagues and on the private sector as well as the public sector to implement this very important vision, which of course by now is not his alone, but is shared by so many Singaporeans. And I think it is this spirit of constant endeavor that is so inspiring, and which I believe our Rafflesians, our young Rafflesians and future Rafflesians will continue to embody. Now, under the Forward SG exercise led by DPM Lawrence Wong, the government is committed to creating the conditions for Singapore and Singaporeans to succeed. These include building strong and stable families, empowering our seniors to age well and healthily, uplifting lower-income families through social empowerment, strengthening our food and water security, as well as managing our limited land and environmental resources responsibly. We need to invest in our future and deal with the challenges of today to provide a strong foundation for future generations to come. In a world that is rapidly evolving and which is full of uncertainties, we need more social advocates to call attention to and champion the needs of the environment, our people, as well as generations to come. And it takes a whole of society effort to make this possible. And this is why I am very delighted to note that this conference today is going to take on pressing issues of the day. And to everyone here, let me extend my gratitude to the audience, to the organizers, and very importantly, to the speakers and panelists for coming together on this weekend morning. It is very commendable when the objective is to harness the power of knowledge as well as human networks for social good. And to our distinguished speakers and panelists in particular, thank you for taking the time to come here and share with us your expertise and knowledge. And I believe your very rich and varied experience is going to be inspiring and invaluable to us. And I believe that there will be even more who are going to be committed to the cause of sustainability after hearing from you. Of course, I think in this room will also be those that are going to blaze new trails in future, be it in terms of policy, be it in terms of science and technological innovations, or innovations in terms of social mobilization. I also want to express my gratitude to the organizers. I know that Jeog always leads and builds dynamic teams, and I'm so happy to meet so many of you today here. I'm sure everyone will find today's conference a very beneficial and memorable one. My only regret is not being able to stay for the entire conference due to other events that I have to be at for today. So please, I seek everyone's understanding. If you see me slipping out later, it is not because the conference is not interesting. Quite on the contrary, I wish I could stay for longer, but I envy all of you because you'll be able to benefit fully from the knowledge and the insights shared. Thank you, everyone, and have a great weekend.
Thank you, Ms. Sim Ann. We will now kick off our speaker series. If you would like to ask questions, please scan the QR code and join us on Slido, where you will be able to input your questions. We will now begin the conference by hearing about sustainability in our natural environment. Our first speaker today is Mr. Dan Duong. Dan is an innovation, technology, and sustainability consultant with more than 25 years of experience in MNCs and startups. He is a senior consultant at Silica Consulting and was previously the Chief Technology Officer and Head of Product at IncomeLend. Dan is also an entrepreneur in residence at INSEAD and leads the sustainability pillar of the INSEAD Singapore Alumni Association. Dan will speak on where we currently stand in addressing issues on climate change. Thank you, Dan.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. I'm very happy to be here with you this morning. I will be speaking about climate because the first step in the resolution of any problem is first to acknowledge the problem, its scale, and to understand how it happened, what it is. So I will be talking about climate. All the information I'm going to show you come from the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change, which represents the scientific consensus on the topic. The slide I will show you are extracted from a more complete one-hour presentation, which in addition to climate, talk about how businesses can adapt their strategies to the challenges. But today I will really focus on climate alone. So I will start with this quote from Antonio Guterres, the United Nations Secretary General. I'll give you a few seconds to read the quote. And I would like you to reflect on the words that Antonio Guterres is using. He's a diplomat. We would expect from him soft diplomatic language. But you see that at this conference, he used words like existential threat, threaten to swallow us. So try to think, why is he using such strong words? Is he exaggerating? Is he ill-informed? Is he mistaken? Does he have a secret agenda? Or could it be that the climate challenge is really an existential threat to our societies? And are we treating it as such? So let's dive into it. And first, let's try to understand what is climate change. At the core of it, there is a phenomenon called the greenhouse effect, which regulates the energy balance around the planet. All energy on Earth comes from the sun in the form of visible light. A part of it is reflected away towards space when light rays hit white surfaces like clouds or ice. This is a small upward pointing yellow arrow. The rest of the energy reaches the planet and is absorbed by various elements of the planet. Now the planet, being at a certain temperature, will also radiate energy, but infrared energy. Now it happens that in the atmosphere there are some molecules like water vapor, carbon dioxide, methane, which are transparent to visible light but interact with infrared radiation. These are the greenhouse gases, and their effect is that they will trap a part of the energy of the infrared radiation and keep it around the planet instead of letting it escape towards space. This is a small orange arrow. This phenomenon has always existed. There is a natural greenhouse effect. Without it, the temperature on Earth would be minus 18 degrees, and there would be no life as we know it. So the natural greenhouse effect is a good thing. Now the problem comes from our activities since the Industrial Revolution, which are emitting additional greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide being the main one, but there are also methane, nitrous oxide, and others. And these additional greenhouse gases amplify the greenhouse effect. It's a bit like adding an additional blanket around the planet, which traps more energy. So let's see what happens now. On this slide, you see the distribution of this additional energy among various components of the Earth system. 91% of the energy is absorbed by the oceans and raises the water temperature. 3% of the energy melt different types of ices. And 1% of the energy stays in the atmosphere and raises the global average air temperature. We stand today at plus 1.1, 1.2 degrees above pre-industrial level for air temperature. But bear in mind that we are talking here about a global average. It's not the same everywhere on the planet. For example, at the poles, the increase is 4 times faster. It means that at the moment, when we say 1.2 on average, it means already plus 5 degrees at the poles. So what are the consequences of all this? Of course, we have the rise of the sea levels, and we have a disruption of water cycles due to more evaporation on land and overseas. Then we have more frequent and more intense extreme weather events, which eventually leads to the disruption of biodiversity, a strain on freshwater resources, a spread of vector of disease, and eventually a decrease in agricultural production. The effect of all these on human societies are an impact on human health, famines, climate refugees, and of course exacerbation of geopolitical tensions. So we all have in mind recent examples of all these events, extreme weather events. I could list, for example, last year in 2022, the flooding in Pakistan, which lasted for 5 months, impacted 34 million people, destroying thousands of buildings and the livelihood assets of millions of people. This year, more recently, the wildfire in Canada, which started in March, which are still ongoing. 200,000 square kilometers burnt. To give you an idea, it's equivalent to the surface of Cambodia. Heat wave in Europe, etc., etc. And about food production, I don't know if you're aware, but India banned export of rice this year. On this slide, just to illustrate one of the components I mentioned, the sea level rise, this slide shows a simulation of flooded areas in 2050, when the sea level rise will be 50 centimeters above pre-industrial level. At the moment, we stand at plus 20 centimeters. In 2050, it will be plus 50 centimeters. Note that this is inevitable. It will happen whatever we do. The sea level rise will continue for decades and probably centuries, even if we stop emissions tomorrow, which we are not doing. So what you see on this slide is that the river deltas in the region are particularly vulnerable. And you also see the importance that these deltas represent in terms of population, economy, and food production. What this means is that in 20 years from now, there will be tens of millions of people who will have to move because the land where they are living now will have salt deposited by seawater. So try to think of the consequence of this for Singapore. In addition to the implacable chain of events that I described already, unfortunately, they are worse. There are feedback loops and tipping points. I'm just giving a very quick example of a feedback loop. For example, I take the sea ice melting. What is happening is when sea ice melts, the white surface of the ice is replaced by the blue surface of the water. I mentioned earlier the albedo effect, where sun rays can be reflected away into space when they hit white surface. If there is less ice, there is less surface, so less energy sent away into space, so more energy reaching the planet. More energy reaching the planet means higher temperature. Higher temperature means more ice melting the next summer. More ice melting, less albedo, etc. And you see that we have a vicious circle. There are roughly tens of these phenomena which could happen, and the problem is that the scientific community is unable today to quantify exactly what would be the impact if these phenomena were to happen at a significant scale. That's why at the Paris Agreement in 2015, COP21, the objective to limit climate change has been set to 2 degrees. This figure has not been chosen at random. It's because below 2 degrees, these phenomena, positive feedback loops and tipping point, have a low probability of happening. Above 2 degrees, their probabilities of happening increase significantly, and you can also have a cascading effect. If one phenomenon happens, it can trigger the other ones. And today, nobody is able to calculate, to predict, to quantify what would be the effect of this. That's why the 2 degrees objective is extremely important. So where do we stand today? On this slide, you see various trajectories of reduction of greenhouse gases. At the bottom, in blue, you see the trajectories which are compliant with 1.5 degrees objective. Slightly above, you see the trajectories which would be compliant with the 2 degrees objective. Today, globally in the world, we are in the orange zone. We are on a trajectory which leads us toward anything between 2.5 to 3 degrees of global warming at the end of the century. So this is not good enough. So collectively, all of us, we need to react, and we need to change that, because we cannot afford to take the risk of letting global warming go beyond 2 degrees. We need to treat the climate crisis really as an existential threat. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dan. I really like the quote you shared. Climate change is quite simply an existential threat for most life on the planet. I hope it's something we all keep in mind in our day-to-day lives. Our next speaker is Dr. Siti Maryam Yaakub. Dr. Siti is a senior director in the International Blue Carbon Institute. She is a marine ecologist who works across tropical marine and coastal habitats. Her work and research interests lie in ecosystem restoration and nature-based solutions for adaptation and mitigation in marine environments. For her work on championing sustainability in Singapore, Dr. Siti was elected to Harper's Bazaar's Power List in 2021. Dr. Siti's topic is on the role of blue carbon in climate, biodiversity, and communities. Thank you, Dr. Siti.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for that kind introduction. My name is Dr. Siti Maryam, and Dan has set the stage for what is truly a depressing note to start this conference on. So I'm hoping today to actually provide a solution to some of these climate change issues. It's not going to be the silver bullet by any means, but it does pave a way for us to address some of the pathways for decarbonization and for climate mitigation, and that is called blue carbon. Now, Dan has already spoken about what carbon is, so CO2 being the main emissions from all of our human activities. I'm going to be touching on how natural habitats and natural climate solutions can actually be a source for hope for us. Oh, this is my opening slide. So I'm going to be talking about blue carbon for climate, but also for biodiversity, because the twin crises of climate change and biodiversity loss are deeply intertwined, as well as for communities. So blue carbon is carbon that is removed by ocean systems, and it's stored in the biotic and the sedimentary elements in natural ocean systems. So we've got, Dan mentioned that the ocean absorbs a lot of the heat that is irradiated by the sun. In fact, it absorbs about 40% of the anthropogenic CO2 that is emitted through our various activities. And there is only so much the ocean can take, but what it can take has helped us buffer the effects of climate change thus far. So blue carbon is captured in things like salt marshes, which we don't have a lot of in the tropics because it's more of a temperate system. But we do have mangroves, we have seagrass, we have macroalgae, or seaweed, as some of you may know it as well as phytoplankton, which is tiny microscopic organisms that float about and live freely in the water. So it's covered in all of these biotic elements, but what's really special about blue carbon is the fact that in addition to all the biotic elements that absorb CO2, CO2 is also stored, or rather organic carbon is also stored in marine sediments. And marine sediments are more effective at sequestering and keeping carbon there compared to, say, terrestrial systems, because they're frequently inundated with water. And this slows down the breakdown and decomposition. I'm sure you guys remember your science. And this simply means that the carbon is being locked away faster than it can be broken down and returned to the carbon cycle. So in terms of the role of coastal wetlands, which includes all of these three blue carbon habitats, mangrove, salt marsh, and seagrass, they play an outsized role in mitigating climate change. And from what Dan is telling us, we need all the solutions we can get. And we cannot get to our target goal of staying below 2 degrees without incorporating nature and nature conservation. You can see here that everybody talks about tree planting as a natural climate solution, and that is completely viable. I'm not dissing it completely. But let's be real, guys. The numbers speak for itself, and it shows that coastal wetlands have an outsized role to play in mitigating climate change. So you can see here that I have here the two components I spoke about earlier. I'm hoping this laser works. No, it doesn't, it's too far. But you can see the lighter colors is where your plant biomass is, and the darker color is where your soil biomass is. So that's the real secret of blue carbon. It's locked away in the sediments. And this is a very esoteric concept, because when I speak to this, when I speak about this to government officials, I had one very interesting case where I was talking about how they need to conserve their mangroves so that, to mitigate climate change. And he's like, and how the voluntary markets come into it. And he asked me the question, he's like, okay, that's great. So how do I take this soil carbon and sell it on the market? And that is completely the opposite of what we're trying to achieve. So esoteric concept, but very important in our efforts to mitigate climate change. So I only have 7 minutes to do this, and I think I'm already running out of time. So I'm just going to touch now on blue carbon and biodiversity. So in addition to all of the climate mitigation that blue carbon ecosystems can provide, they also have all of these co-benefits. So co-benefits in the sense that they have regulating services. So they do regulate, they do protect our coastlines. So I'm sure you've seen the reports, when we have these large tsunamis, that the coastal areas with a huge buffer of mangroves suffered less damage than the ones that did not. So that's a good example. They also harbor a lot of threatened and endangered species. So in conserving biodiversity, that's very important. And I like this one, especially when I speak to my fellow Singaporeans, is that it supports us in our food production. So seagrass meadows, for example, support up to 20% of the world's fisheries in an intricate cycle that takes us all the way from the coast to the oceans. So I like to tell this when people ask me, why do I need to conserve these systems? My answer is, well, if we want to preserve our national dish, and at the risk of igniting a fight with Malaysia again, our national dish chili crab, the mud crabs are found in mangroves. Those wonderful prawns that you love to eat at seafood dinners, they're found in seagrass meadows. So in addition to the climate benefits, we also have huge biodiversity benefits that not only support human health, but also human life in the food that we eat and the protein that sustains us. And this brings me to my next point, which is that blue carbon ecosystems are socio-ecological systems. And when I say this, it's really reflecting on the deep connections that people have had with the natural environment for millennia. You can see here in this photo, there is a lady, and she's collecting fresh urchin, and we all know how much we all love uni. And she's collecting this from the seagrass meadows. And this is a space where women and children participate in sustaining and supporting their families. Because the practice of gleaning, which is going out at low tide and collecting from mangroves and seagrass habitats, which exists all the way from Southeast Asia all the way to Africa and beyond, actually subsidizes the cost of living for local and coastal communities and indigenous people. So that's subsidized, and when I say subsidize, what I mean by these is that it provides a readily available source of protein, but it also, okay, I've been given a red flag, which means that I need to wrap up. But it also, it also means that whatever their husbands go out to catch at sea can then be sold on the market. So there's a source of income there, and they're subsidizing the source of living by doing these cleaning activities. But as always, as women, this thing is not accounted for in national GDP. The other thing is, of course, Dan has pointed out all the vulnerabilities that coastal habitats and coastal cities have to climate change. And this is really a nice summary slide with words that are probably too small for you to read. But the gist of it is that we need to, as much as these habitats are able to mitigate climate change, we also need to protect them from the effects of climate change. So things like sea level rise, things like temperature rise. This is so that they can continue to function as effective carbon sinks going into the future. So this is all to say that there are many different mechanisms, and this is where everybody can play a role, from the individual up to your governments and your corporates, through participating in the in the financial systems that are needed to support natural climate solutions and blue carbon in particular. So I'm going to leave it at that, and I'm going to encourage you to ask me questions because these ladies over here are really flashing the red flag at me. So on that note, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Siti. We are so grateful to have someone like you leading these efforts in Singapore. Our next topic is on sustainable investing and finance. In many ways, money is simply a tool and a resource we direct to greater ends. How can we best channel what we have to better serve those around us? This is a topic close to my heart because I'm from the finance industry. So with that, I would like to welcome our next speaker, Mr. Zubin Dabu. Zubin has successfully built, developed, and scaled private banking businesses across markets over the past 25 years. He is a managing director and market head at Bank of Singapore. Prior to this, Zubin held leadership roles at Coutts, Standard Chartered Private Bank, and BNP Paribas. Passionate about sustainability, Zubin has been chairman for Bank of Singapore's Sustainability Forum since 2019 and contributes to OCBC Group's Sustainable Investment Initiatives. At the Association of Banks in Singapore, Zubin also previously co-chaired the Private Banking Sustainable Investment Task Force. He was conferred the title of IBF Fellow, the only fellowship conferred by IBF for private banking and wealth management in 2022. Zubin's topic is on an ecosystem approach to address sustainability. Thank you, Zubin.
Good morning. Thank you for that lovely introduction. I was told I need to kind of wrap this up in 7 or 8 minutes, and the introduction was so long, so I think I have less time now. So what I want to try and do today is to kind of give you a quick synopsis, a brief in terms of our approach to sustainability. Coincidentally, I think we started this journey about 5 years back. This is the 5th anniversary of this conference, so something in common over here. And I really liked the words the senior minister kind of spoke about harnessing the power of knowledge and social networks. And I think what we're trying to do today is to be able to tell you that sustainability is such a large area, and its requirement is so urgent, as I think Dan and Dr. Siti has just kind of shared with you, that no single entity can do this alone. And even for a group as big as ours, and you know, we are part of OCBC Group, which is even larger, in an area like Singapore, the need to really work with the ecosystem to kind of move things faster. And I think that's what we'll try and share with you. So the first thing we wanted to do was to identify that when we're looking at sustainable solutions for clients, when our bankers go to clients, clients are also going to ask, but what are you doing on your own organizations? Where are you on gender diversity? What are you doing in terms of, when you're traveling and your kind of carbon footprint? So the first thing we did was we created around 7 work streams to try and touch base these areas. And we identified around 8 sustainable development goals from the 17, specifically where we could kind of focus on. But also these 8 somehow have a co-link to many of the others in the 17. But that was just to kind of get started. Now, I wanted to just give you a couple of examples of what these various work streams did. So we said that, can we put our money where our mouth is? So when we are lending to clients, can we start giving a higher lending value for clients who have higher rated sustainability ratings? So we were the first private bank to go back and say that for clients whose investment portfolios are higher in terms of sustainable ratings, we'll give higher lending values. So we put our money where our mouth is. We also wanted to see that a tremendous amount of paper wastage kind of happens when we kind of send out transaction statements, when we make clients kind of sign forms and the like. And so we said, we had a digitalization group. And the first objection we had was maybe our next gen younger clients would subscribe to it, but many of our older clients may not want it. But we started kind of nudging that and creating awareness. And today, in the last 3-4 years, we moved our digital penetration to around 86%, which was a lot higher than we thought it would be. And then we started measuring our own electricity, our energy consumption and the like. So the idea was to really set ESG within the DNA of the bank, not just within the product shelf. then you want to be able to start getting this message across to your key stakeholders, your clients, your staff, your communities around us. So this is something which we've been doing in terms of client awareness. I thought it was useful to kind of put Jacinda Ardern, the previous Prime Minister of New Zealand. I think she's visiting us next week. We have a client engagement event because she's a strong proponent of gender diversity. She's a strong proponent in terms of kind of climate change. And also I think a lot of learnings about when the crisis happened during COVID. I mean, how somebody as young as this was able to really kind of navigate. So looking forward to kind of hearing more about her. We also have sustainability themed conferences where we had one, I think, last month where we flew in this lady who is called the Green Goddess of China, and she was talking about what China is doing around sustainability. But it was fascinating to kind of hear, because even clients who are not necessarily interested in sustainability start looking and realizing that, look, there are opportunities for investing over here, and we can channelize our money into areas where they'll do good. So that was engaging with clients. We also do quite a bit in terms of creating awareness within the staff. And how do you then maximize people who have their own interests? So we created a women's network. The women's network kind of runs on its own, works on embracing the ecosystem. We also then created sustainability field trips for our staff to go across and get a feel of what's happening. And then using those, we try and also kind of bring them back about how do you bring it back into the bank and you bring it with your clients. And I have a couple of examples on that. And finally, one other way of engaging employees, if the sticker moves, okay, is through CSR activities. And how do you kind of then work with the communities? So we had an interesting so I'm going to give this as an example in the interest of time. So we have an OCBC Sustainability Day where we try and bring in all our various ecosystem partners to showcase the solutions they have on sustainability. And then I was walking through the Bank of Singapore Center, which is our building, and we just had our coffee shop, Dimbula, whose lease expired, and we were looking at a new tenant coming in. And we figured there's space over here, and can we showcase something which kind of knits together different elements of sustainability? And then we kind of put together this, which was quite interesting. So we got the social kitchen, and the idea was we wanted somebody who would then give employment to individuals from disadvantaged backgrounds. So there was something where employment would be kind of given over there. We also then found TicTech, which was another provider which had shown urban farming interior. So we decided that we could kind of use these indoor plants, urban farming, and these plants could then also kind of go back in terms of the produce produced at the counters, and what was left over could go to charitable organizations. And the furniture we kind of used from somebody who then reconstructed wooden chopsticks. So this became a bit of a showcase as such. And even when bankers kind of go down for their coffee, the money they pay goes to a good. When they start kind of interacting with their clients, you now start getting soft touch, talk points just to kind of get the conversation around sustainability going. So one of the things I think which we kind of figured very early was the fact that banks like us are very good in the governance part, in the G part of sustainability, but we're not very strong on the environmental part. So we were the first bank to tie up with WWF, and there's a huge project in Indonesia around conservation, which we are kind of co-sponsoring with WWF. But in turn, we also kind of worked with WWF, who have tremendous training tools to try and design something which was with ASFI for banks and wealth managers. We piloted this for our bankers globally, and then ASFI decided to kind of launch it to the rest of the private banking industry here in Singapore. Another area which Another area which we kind of found, and you've been hearing about that in Singapore, is the amount of family offices coming over here and investing in Singapore. And when many of them come, quite often they ask us and they say, look, we come from China, we come from Indonesia, we come from Europe, and we tend to kind of give to these causes, whether it's healthcare or education or elderly. And they come and ask banks like us, where should we put in our money? And most banks, including us, we get nervous about recommending a charity. And the reason is we don't have enough to do our due diligence on the many hundred charities. And we kind of tell family offices, you decide where, but we'll be happy to kind of manage your money. And we felt we're wasting an opportunity over here. So we tied up with Community Foundation Singapore, and we said, look, when somebody comes back to us and wants to be able to invest in a cause, we could go back to CFS, who could say, look, these are the 4 charities in Singapore where you could put your money into. So it's again a way of channelizing the strengths of the ecosystem and having solutions in place for that. We also felt it was important to create awareness, so we tied up with EY, Ernst & Young, to be able to set up a thought publication. And there's a lot of information around sustainability, but not too much around our region and what works for our region, which is very different from what works in Europe and the US. So this was a report which we have annually. And at the end of our presentation, I'm going to leave a QR code for those of you who want to be able to just download this report. I can see I'm almost towards a red flag, so I'm going to kind of hurry this up now very soon. I think this was, we felt doing this ourselves when the rest of the industry in Singapore wasn't going to be as fast, wasn't going to help us or the industry. So we co-chaired this at the Association of Banks in Singapore, and we created possibly the world's first framework where we got the UBSs, the Credit Suisses, the Swiss banks, the American banks, and the local banks, DBS, UOB, ourselves. And we just kind of agreed on a framework and an approach on sustainability. I think I was delighted that earlier this year we had Euromoney come and kind of meet us and say that they recognized us as the global best private bank for sustainable investments. And my first question was, thank you, but why? And they said, you guys are new as a bank, and you are new in your sustainability journey, but I think the part you are doing right is really working with the ecosystem. This is the QR code for the publication I spoke to you about, and I think it's useful, it's interesting, but I think I've just about made it avoiding a red flag, so thank you very much.
I think Zubin has shown us an incredibly structured approach towards building ESG practices, and I think the recognition he received is well-deserved. Thank you, Zubin. Our next speaker is Ms. Vivian Claire Liew. In her role as founding director of Philanthropy Works, Vivian advises sovereign wealth funds and leading financial institutions at the cutting edge of optimizing climate alpha in portfolio valuation. She also presently serves as a climate action expert in the World Economic Forum. Vivian has been recognized by her world as one of Singapore's 50 most inspiring women and was on Prestige's 40 under 40 list. Vivian's topic for today is on climate smart investing for impact investors and sovereigns. Thank you, Vivian.
Morning, everyone. So you sat through 3 great presentations. I think we'll mix things up a little bit, because this would be in the context of what you've just gone through. I think this is a little heavy. So we'll do some of that because the slides are up. But I just want to get a sense for why we're here. So we are focusing on climate and sustainability, but do you understand why? Why we are dedicating our careers, some of us our lives, for this. So can we take a minute, turn to the person next to you, and ask them who they love most in the world, or if that's not a topic. I mean, yes, I see some girls giggling. Can be your parents too, or your pets, or your soft toy. Hopefully not. Something that's alive. That's the idea. Or your favorite food. Okay, so someone you love, whoever you love most, or your favorite food. Very quickly, whoever's next to you. Yeah, I see a guy in a suit here. Don't be shy. It can be favorite food. I mean, you don't have to disclose who you love. Okay. Good to see you, Soon Hock.
Myself.
Okay, very good. It can be favorite food. Don't look so serious. I mean, this is not. You know, no one's reporting your answer.
The time you can spend.
How much time did they give you? 7 minutes. Don't worry. Or 10. Okay, whatever. Okay. Okay. Just one. Not. You know, the 20 people you love or 20 favorite foods. You can write an essay on that. Okay. Any volunteers? Can we hear from? Okay, I think there's a lot of excitement amongst the RGS girls. So could one of you be brave enough to share? So, you know, one current student, one alum, and, you know, for diversity, we also have some gentlemen here. So I would hope that one of you would volunteer. So whoever gets to speak gets to co-call the next one. Girls, Rafflesians. All right, thank you, yay! Oh, I just realized we should have a mic. Oh, well done. Is that the new prefect's uniform? Oh, okay. Normal PE uniform, well, okay, great. Your mother. In a few years. Okay, great. Cement should be here. Maybe that's why she left early. I'm kidding. That's wonderful. I feel like I should give her my speaking slot because that was great. Straight from the heart, straight to the point. Did everyone catch that? I'm not sure about the few years part. I think that timeline is a little faster than what we currently think or hope. But, you know, we're at 1.2 Celsius now, in case you didn't know. Not very far from that 1.5 or 2 that folks are talking about. But yes, we are fighting for our loved ones. We are fighting for, you know, your favorite food, for whatever you love in this world. That's why it matters. That's why we're here on a Saturday morning when, you know, I think most of us have had a long week, long month, long year, or long decade. Or more. So that's why it matters, right? So I hope someone got it on video and is sending it to her mom and family. I'm sure they'll be very, very, very proud. Okay, so current student, all right, an alum, or a gentleman. Would you like to call someone? So alum or guy? Okay, the guy next in front of you, not your dad, right? Okay. Okay, 没关系，你可以讲华语。We did learn Chinese at RGS, so 非常欢迎你。Okay, and I'll give you the mic too, so no excuses.
抱歉啊，我的英文不是很好，所以我用华文讲给你们听。其实我自己的工作和这个 climate change 还多多少少有一点关系，因为我的 major 是 chemistry，so I fully understand 刚刚的那些人讲的东西。我自己本人就是做这个 water treatment wastewater treatment.
OK，对不起啊，因为我本身只有10分钟 ，so I only have 10 minutes, and I don't know how much is already gone. So why do you care about climate sustainability? Why are you here on a Saturday morning?
If climate change, the basic principle I think is associated with chemistry.
OK.
You're talking about carbon dioxide. You're talking about NH4. This is all chemicals.
Right.
So if you want to do climate change, you have a heart, you have desire, you must have some knowledge.
OK. Thank you.
Of course, you must have money.
Excellent. OK. 多谢。
不客气。
OK. So now an alum. Anyone? All right. That lady in the hat. Oh, now I have to run again. Okay, you can help me run. Thank you. Woo!
You have to love yourself in order to love others, right? So you love yourself so much. Yes, you love yourself so much, they become more conscious of what you eat and what environment is happening, and you make an effort to better the environment, and therefore, in the process, you also impart the same thinking and beliefs to the rest, right? All these things about climate change, everybody knows, but first of all, know why you do it. Yeah, that's all.
Thank you so much. Okay, fine. So, yes, loving yourself, loving your families, and having the knowledge to make sure that our climate action is effective and meets the challenge of our time. Otherwise, there's no better age, right? Filia Melioris AV. Are we creators or merely inheritors? Do we just enjoy, or are we going to build? Not to put too much pressure on our students, but clearly this is for all of us. Okay, so, oh great, I have 90 seconds left. And this is not working very well. Okay, key takeaway, it's hot. Much hotter than you realize. These are, all the decades. That's the key point. But you already knew that, didn't you? So, So, we are in crisis. The top 2 show sea ice levels. Basically, that shows that a lot has melted. And when sea ice melts, what happens to islands like Singapore? So Bukit Timah Hill is not a real hill, as most of you know, right? And even if it were, we can't all go to Bukit Timah Hill and camp there. So I think that makes clear why this is an existential crisis for Singapore. I'm supposed to talk about sustainable finance. And it is important because, all the wonderful projects that Siti and, not just Zubin, but his BOS colleagues, all that they come up with, we need the capital markets as the lifeblood of the economy to fund, right? All the good stuff we do need to structure it accordingly so that people who have the capital are willing to part with their money for a certain return, a certain risk. We'll delve into this, I think, in the Q&A, or maybe I'll put up the slides on, I don't know, LinkedIn or Instagram or something. I don't know whether you guys know LinkedIn, but anyway. I think, yes, I have the red card now. So, okay, so I hope you remember for whom we live, for whom we work, for whom we dedicate ourselves to creating a better age, all right? And that will drive everything. Thank you.
Vivian is such a wonderful and charismatic speaker. That was such an effective method of driving in the importance of sustainability for all of us. We need to invite her back to more of our events. Again, if you would like to ask questions, please scan the QR code that we will shortly flash on screen. So earlier, we heard from Dan and Dr. Siti on the importance of preserving our natural environment. Now, let us all turn our attention to our built environment. I'm pleased to introduce Ms. Gillian Chee, the founder and managing director of Global Impact Assets Pte Ltd, a real estate advisory firm with a focus on ESG properties. Gillian has an extensive track record of over 30 years in the real estate industry. She has managed fund portfolios worth over $3 billion USD. Gillian's topic today is on the importance of incorporating ESG into real estate from an institutional investor's perspective. Thank you, Gillian.
After Vivian's presentation and speech, I don't know what else to say. So perhaps we can start the clicker rolling. And yeah, I'll try to get you guys involved because I've got something interesting that may not need your volunteer, but just raise of hands. So my topic today, ESG considerations in the built environment or real estate. Very bricks and mortar. Some things that you see over here you can relate to. Thanks for the introduction, Bella. So this is just to showcase that, yes, I've won a couple of awards, but unfortunately not yet green awards. That's my next potential accomplishment. I am very passionate about ESG. So I try to, hopefully with my years of experience, spread the good word. Yeah, and I was very glad that my alma mater, NUS, invited me back to address the MBA as well as the MSc students. Largely, we are looking at leadership here because, as you have heard from the rest of the speakers, it's a very urgent call. Today, I'm very proud and privileged to be invited by Sharon to address the RGS alumni. And of course, Ms. Sim has left, but yeah, we need the policymakers to hear a little bit about how urgent things are. Next. Now, this is where I need a show of hands. Who's into thrifting? Oh, wow. Wow, 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 wow. Okay, so my attire today is thrifted, right? Except for the scarf. Thank you very much. Right, I thought I'll dress appropriately. Why? Because firstly, it's what we put on every day that matters, right? The small little things. The choice of materials, we don't usually decide, but yes, we can actually choose recycled materials, and it does make a difference. We are not going into that today because I'm talking about real estate. But then again, you know, thrift shops. So I've helped the setup of this Nongcherie. Does anybody know Nongcherie? Oh, it's okay. You can check it out right now. It's on Instagram. So Nongcherie was birthed during the COVID days, right, by a student, just like yourselves, also happened to be my daughter. Right? So some of you have attended some of her bazaars, as well as the, what do you call that, charity fundraising events, right, that Nongcherie. Thank you so much. And some of you have even contributed your old clothes, right, and it's still going on strong. Right? Now, 2,000 followers, not to be reckoned with. Right. Some of my clients, I'm very privileged to have served blue chip companies, pensions of the world, sovereign wealth funds. Previously, last year alone, I think I touched about 120 million worth of properties, transacted about 100 million, and then put people into their homes. General Atlantic, one of the largest, I would say, philanthropic and PE firm, as well as Blackstone. This year, BlackRock, and some of the well-known developers all there for you. So I would like to introduce you to my pet topic, real estate. Right? Educated in Singapore in the School of Real Estate, right? And look at this cycle where we are at. We've got land use and planning. These are also suitable for career planning, you know, in case some of you are thinking what to do in sustainability. The architects come in, designers, right? All these are the part of the ecosystem where we call the life cycle. Development. A key part of what we contribute today to our lives is how we develop this auditorium. Are these lights LED? Thank you. Yes. Is the air conditioning at 26 degrees? No, I'm very cold. A few things, right? Do we have sensor motions to help with our electrical consumption? Yes or no? No. So long story short, can be improved and it's evolving. My speaker next, Amos, will also address that in terms of the technology as well as the building materials. But let me quickly, before the red flag comes, leasing, property management, sales and acquisition. That's where I spent about 30 years of my life doing. right? Initially, just merely for profit. Today, with an ESG focus. Last but not least, back to what Georgina has addressed, we are hoping that we can make cities, human settlements inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable, one brick at a time. This building behind is one of my clients' projects. It's called the Solitaire, like the diamond. Yeah, and GIA also, we can call it, diamond, clarity, etc., right? So this building is award-winning. As of last night, Property Guru gave them 3 big awards. The best commercial developer, the best architecture, and I cannot remember the third, right? But it's also green platinum. It's coming up in 2028, so look out for that. Next. Sorry about the pie chart, but it's big enough for you to see why real estate matters. The built economy actually contributes to 42%. Sorry, disastrous, right? Of the world's GHG emission, carbon dioxide. So everything we are looking at, from the materials to the building process, is actually contributing to global warming. And also, it's a very bulky asset class, meaning it takes hundreds of millions to acquire a building, billions to build a city. So really, it does matter. United Nations did a projection that about 2.6 trillion square feet is going to be injected in the world in the next 37 years. It's equivalent to 1 New York City every month. Can you believe that? Infrastructure and building. So if we're not going to do anything about it today, sorry, we're going to, yellow flag, burn. Okay, next. Last but not least, this part I think I can just glide through because it's a definition of ESG in terms of real estate. So real estate has a profound impact on society, where we live, where we work. Zubin has lovely ideas, and he's put that into action in real estate with the social kitchen. We need more of that. We need you to own a few more buildings, right? Next, I'm very heartened that my industry, we got to be whacked because we are IRR-driven, internal rate of return. It does not have these 3 words, environmental, social, and governance, right? But right now, we're moving towards that because there are many governments in the world, the pension funds will not give us any money unless we are Article 8 and Article 9 compliant, right? Or we have taxonomy that's coming up. We've got a lot of nods here because a few of us are in the finance, the VC, the PE, the AC. Sorry, ladies, we can talk about the C's later, right? But for now, just know that investors' demand are driving this implementation of ESG. Apart from ethical considerations, I'm very glad that ethics is up there. Women, gender, as well as inclusivity is a top topic as well. As finally, best practice and to give yourself a competitive edge. Red flag, I'm so sorry. Last but not least, a few of these Singapore buildings, they are owned by institutions, right? Not necessarily the governments. The last building, Shenton House, just 2 days ago, was just sold for 538 million. Very old building, right? What are we going to do about it? Hopefully the chairman of IOI will give us a brand new green building, and I think he will. So case studies, not much time. I have a red flag now. I just want to tell you my clients have invested 70 million Suntec City. Today, it's a green mark platinum. This program will go on till 2029. Our industry is moving towards, not fast enough, but there are some good players. 108 Robinson Road, just TOP'd. This building, the windows you can open so you can measure the carbon dioxide, right? Very refreshing, I hope. It's a brand new building, still vacant. Anybody who wants to occupy it, come look for me. Another client of mine, he decided that he wants to conserve Armenian Street next to SMU Law, right? He built a beautiful Soho. And my proudest moment, NUS, SDE, first net zero building in Asia. It's a model answer. We are huge in model answers. However, is this going to be economically viable? We shall see. Thank you so much for your time. This is Singapore, and we are doing as much as we can. The government is pushing forward. You will see huge changes in the built environment, but maybe not yet enough unless all of us participate. Sustainability is here to stay, otherwise we will not be. Thank you very much.
Doesn't Gillian look so put together and wonderful? I hope everyone will go on Nong Sherry's Instagram page and check out that thrift store and see how you can support it. And as she mentioned, I'm also so glad that capital is flowing towards green buildings. This means that the importance of sustainability in the built environment is being recognized on a more institutional level. Our next speaker on green real estate is Amos Foong. Amos is a corporate manager at Tiong Seng Contractors Private Limited. He was previously a BCA Industry Built Environment Scholar and a joint scholar with Tiong Seng. As corporate manager, he spearheads the sustainability initiatives for the contractor arm. Amos's topic for today is sustainability in the built environment from the lens of a contractor: design, construction, operations, and compliance. Thank you, Amos.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, distinguished guests. I'm Amos, and today I'll be sharing more on the built environment. So my topic is as shows up there. So for today's discussion, I would like to bring across two very strong messages. The first is I would like to share more on the various enablers that have been driving sustainability in the built environment. And secondly, I would also like to address many of the misconceptions people have about the industry itself. And building up from what the very talented Miss Gillian has shared before that, while she covered the macro landscape, I'll be covering the more operational elements. So hopefully with both our presentations combined, you will get a better appreciation of where the built environment is moving towards. So just a little bit more about myself. You can scan the QR code to my LinkedIn profile. So when I start today, the question that we want to ask ourselves is, what is sustainability in the built environment? A lot of people this morning has actually gave their definition. But I feel that this particular definition by the World Green Building Council is very apt. They have three very big baskets. First, on climate action, health and well-being, and last but not least, resource and circularity. So climate action has been spoken so much today. It's already about mitigating it, stopping it as much as possible. Health and well-being, because we construct so much, we really want to ensure that our constructions, our developments do not negatively impact the various habitants of the land. So when we build, we don't want there to be pollution, maybe dust pollution, water pollution, noise pollution. And last but not least, resource and circularity really talks about ensuring that there's sufficient resources for the future generation, not depriving them of the ability to use the materials that we use today. So on climate action, we have planet, health and well-being, we have people, and resource and circularity, we have place. So it's really striking a delicate balance between planet, people, and place. And they have also very thoughtfully attributed them to the various sustainability development goals by the United Nations. So why does it matter very quickly? I believe Gillian has also shared on the various regulatory landscapes. Just to put it out there, some of the drivers actually are the SGBC 2030 Master Plan, which very prescriptively defines targets and goals that we actually have to meet. That includes having a significant portion of buildings having the relevant certifications, green certifications, meeting certain energy targets moving forward, and having greenings to themselves. We also look at the BCA Green Mark 2021, which is a new initiative that was released 2 years ago. For practitioners like myself, we do know that this is a major step forward because years ago when Green Mark was first released, they actually focused a lot on the operational aspects of things, so how much water consumption, how much energy consumption. But then with 2021, they actually looked at embodied carbon. How is your building performing when it's being constructed? So these are the key drivers. It's largely by regulatory intervention. So with that, like it or not, sustainability is here to stay. And I'm going to be sharing a couple facets of it. You can look at it from various lenses, from a design angle, how the building is framed, construction whereby it's being built, operationally, how it's being used, and last but not least, overarching everything else is the compliance portion. I'll really be paying special attention to the first two buckets, design and construction. So first off, for design itself, if you just take a step back 10 years ago, the landscape of construction has really shifted quite a bit. Previously, you're right, construction used to be very dirty, used to be very laborious, used to be very resource intensive, but increasingly it's actually moving towards a manufacturing mindset whereby we do have things that you see up there. The big block that you see, the first picture, is actually this thing known as PPVC, whereby a lot of the works are no longer being done on site. They're being done in a controlled environment whereby we are able to control the quality of work, the schedule of work, and things along that line. So because of that, we are able to actually reduce the amount of wastage, because when you use a lot of these modern construction methodologies, for the people in the crowd that used to study in the US or UK, they actually coined the term modern methods of construction. So in this particular area, you need to lock in the design very early on. So at the onset, you lock in the design so you can actually prevent things such as abortive works. Also, by having works done in controlled environments, you ensure that the quality of work is higher, so less reworks in that sense. So you have solutions like PPVC that I shared earlier on. If you stay in HDB, you don't be surprised. Almost everything is done PPVC, is done in modular fashion. We have 3 modules, we stitch them together. Then we also look at construction technology. Construction technology complements it. And last but not least, construction materials like mass engineered timber and structural steel, of which much of them are recyclable. So I just want to bring attention to a couple of case studies. The first one we have is Park Royal Collection at Pickering. So what's interesting about this building is this was the first project in Singapore to adopt this particular technology called Kobiak's voided slab. So effectively, you are displacing concrete from your development itself. And as Gillian mentioned, concrete, which actually comes from cement, is extremely hazardous for the environment. It accounts for around 6 to 7% of all emissions worldwide. And so by effectively displacing it, you reduce the amount of cement that's needed. And there are also other benefits attributed to it. So examples include having a lighter dead load, so you can have lighter columns, smaller dead load altogether. Another example that we are looking at is the NTU Academic Building South. I believe many of you will be going to study that in the future. What's so interesting about this building is that it is significantly and extensively constructed out of mass engineered timber, both for its architectural features as well as its structural elements. So for this building, it's over 40,000 square meters long, and it's actually the largest mass engineered timber structure in the whole of Asia. So putting in some numbers out there, by actually using timber is actually a material that actually sequesters carbon in its source of life itself when it's a tree. Subsequently, by using it as a building material, you prevent its re-release into the environment, effectively being a carbon store. So some big numbers over there, we were able to actually save the amount of, reduce the amount of CO2e emitted out. And also other benefits attributed to all this mass engineered timber is by having it as a modular fashion, it's less pollutive to the environment, especially on the site itself. It's less noisy, it's less dusty, ultimately allowing for a better, more habitable environment for people to live and exist in. So next, I very quickly come to my portion on construction. Having talked about the design portion of things, the technical portion of things, sometimes we do have to recognize that we have to construct in environmentally sensitive areas. So for example, like CCNR, like the central catchment area, you will need to bulldoze and remove trees from the environment. So as a contractor, we must take reactive actions to this. So my company, Tiong Contractors, we're actually operating and constructing outward bound Singapore at Coney Island. Coney Island has been designated by the government to be an environment sensitive zone. So what we have done is we've done a 3-prong approach to actually look at the fauna, flora, as well as capacity building. So examples can be seen above. We do things like tree protection zones, we move trees, we set up boundary lines to make sure that people don't illegally cut down all these trees. And I want to pay special attention to the portion of capacity building. We realize that there's no point in having so much policies when all these policies do not transcend to the ground itself. So we did an extensive campaign from all the way up, all the way down to the workers itself, to actually educate them on the things they actually have to look out for. And we also extensively reached out to nature groups. We also reached out to NEA to actually better get their feedback to improve our processes and so on and so forth. So last but not least, this actually complemented the various extensive measures that we did, which included EIAs and EMMPs. So as I come to the end of my presentation, today I briefly talked about some of the enablers that actually allows for sustainability in the built environment. from a design lens, from a contractor lens, but that's only the tip of the iceberg. I didn't cover a lot of things that pertain to waste management, that pertains to water consumption, electrical consumptions. So if you want to know more, do feel free to reach out to me separately. And the thing is, to the many girls out here today, as you go into the industry, following up what Gillian mentioned, sustainability is here to stay. So do seize the opportunity to actually absorb whatever you can from the various distinguished speakers over here. I'm sure it'll enrich you greatly. Yep, my name is Amos, and thank you so much.
That was so comprehensive. Thank you so much, Amos. These are indeed big trends across the world. Prefab, modular units, green concrete, these are materials and methodologies that lower the cost of construction and green, the construction process at the same time. So I'm sure a lot of investors are paying attention to it. Looking forward to hearing more from Amos in the panel discussion. Our fourth topic for today is on corporate sustainability. With increased globalization, corporations have a wider reach than ever before. And with increasing influence comes increasing responsibility to act for the good of the societies that they serve. Our speaker for this topic is Ms. Genevieve Ding. Genevieve is the head of Sustainability Policy Strategy for APAC and Japan at Amazon Web Services. She sits on the ExCo of SG Tech's Data and Cloud chapter and also sits on its Sustainability Committee. She is a strategic advisor on sustainability to TIJA Ventures, Asia's first gender lens venture capital fund. She has been a repeat speaker at our events and has been so kind and generous with us with her time. She does all of this while being a mother to 3 young kids under the age of 5. Really, really impressive. Today, Genevieve will be speaking on sustainability and digitalization. Thank you, Genevieve.
Thank you so much for having me today. It's always an honor to come back to RGS. It holds very fond memories for me. This is where I made my friends for life, and which instilled me with the values that I have today, and I see in so many of my fellow alumni. So I really hope that you find this conference valuable. Let me just... The title of my presentation is Sustainability and Digitalization, and I wanted to speak about the intersection between sustainability and technology, and how people actually feel that they are counterproductive, right? That with digitalization and increased demand for technology, that this actually has negative consequences of sustainability. But I think we can actually look at it from a different perspective, that technology can actually accelerate the sustainability transformation process itself. I also want to speak about building communities. So don't take this as a presentation on what Amazon or Amazon Web Services does, but more about how you can leverage the private sector to make a bigger impact in terms of sustainability for our community. Okay. So since I'm speaking about corporate sustainability, I wanted to quote this line, which says, "Tomorrow's strongest performing businesses are likely to be the twin transformers, companies that find new value at the intersection of digital technologies and sustainability." And we see that corporations that are powered by these twin engines of growth, which include sustainability, will actually be 2.5 times more likely to outperform their peers. So sustainability actually makes business sense for corporations as well. It's not just something that you do good to feel good. It actually translates into business outcomes and investor confidence. At Amazon, we co-founded the Climate Pledge, which is a commitment to reach net zero carbon by 2040. That's 10 years earlier than the Paris Agreement. And together, we have actually managed to get over 400 companies to sign into the Climate Pledge. And this speaks to how we're trying to build communities with our fellow corporations. And I'll speak a little bit more to that later. We also are on path to power all our operations with 100% renewable energy by 2025. We also have a $100 billion right now climate fund that focuses on nature-based solutions, and a $2 billion climate pledge fund, which is a corporate VC fund that invests in emerging technologies that we think can help us achieve our net zero target. So these are the 400 signatories we have across the world. Includes companies like Microsoft and P&G, IBM, Visa. And when you sign up to the Climate Pledge, you're not just committing to net zero carbon by 2040, but you're also creating a community where you share and exchange information, experiences, and actually partner with other people and other signatories within the Climate Pledge on initiatives to solve common problems. So, for example, 5 Climate Pledge signatories in India are working together to install and establish EV charging infrastructure across India. And these are just examples of how corporations can come together, leveraging the strength and the scale of the private sector to make greater impact. So the Climate Pledge Fund is our corporate venture fund, and we've invested in all these technologies, which we think will help our own journey towards meeting our sustainability targets. I'll focus on a couple of them. So Vivian Technologies is actually electric vehicle truck delivery company. Right. So as you know, Amazon is huge. We've got lots of logistics and transportation. And by investing in electric trucks, this will help reduce our carbon footprint quite a bit. Carbon Cure is very related to the built environment, which Gillian and Amos spoke about earlier. And it's a type of carbon, it's a type of concrete that actually sequesters carbon in the production, during its production stage. And it really helps lower the embodied carbon in our data centers. Nature-based solutions, we think, is definitely a very key pillar to achieving our sustainability goals. And we use nature-based solutions to mitigate carbon emissions outside of our value chain, for example, our Scope 3 emissions across our suppliers. And this is the $100 million climate fund, and $15 million will be allocated to Southeast Asia and APAC region. And on this note, I wanted to speak about the International Blue Carbon Institute the Citi leads. So in line again with creating communities and partnerships, Amazon is the anchor funder for the Blue Carbon Institute. I won't go into any of the details of Blue Carbon because Citi did a great job in that. But suffice to say that this is the potential impact that we can make if we actually partner the private sector and the public sector, as well as the NGO sector, in order to make a bigger difference. And I'm especially excited about blue carbon because it's just something that people don't hear that much about, but we know that the potential to store and sequester carbon is huge. But it also plays an incredibly important part in coastal protection and in building resilience for coastal communities. Renewable energy is another key pillar. We think renewable energy will be a huge reason for reducing, a huge contributor to reducing our carbon emissions. And Amazon today is the world's largest purchaser of renewable energy in the world as a corporation. And we have over 400 global renewable energy projects, ranging from solar to wind. Transportation, we are trying to reduce the carbon footprint of our transportation network, and we've got 9,000 custom electric delivery vans rolled up. Okay, so I actually work for the cloud side of the business, and if you don't know what cloud is, how many of you store photos on your phone, and how many of you have actually run out of space on your phone? Yeah, okay. And how many of you have had to resort to buying cloud storage on Apple or Google or whatever it is? Yeah, so that's exactly what we do. Cloud storage is basically storing data in hyperscale data centers that can actually be much more efficient, right? So studies have shown that storing data or processing data on hyperscale data centers is actually 5 times more efficient than storing your data on-premise data centers, and it actually reduces your energy use and associated carbon footprints by up to 80%. So at Amazon, we look at, AWS, we look at sustainability through different perspectives. I won't go through all of them, but the approach we generally take is sustainability of the cloud, which is basically sustainable IT, and then sustainability through the cloud, which is IT for sustainability. So how you can leverage technology to meet your sustainability objectives. Spoke about this earlier, it's 5 times more energy efficient. Right. We also embrace the circular economy, and I think that speaks quite well to the built environment talks. in speeches earlier on as well, from the design stage to operating and recovering. So once the data centers have, and the service in the data centers reach the end of life, what we do is we try to extract value from the decommissioned parts of the service, and we try to reuse and recycle the component parts of the hardware. We also have a water positive commitment. So data centers use quite a lot of water actually for cooling the data centers, for chillers. Data centers cannot operate above a certain temperature, and that's what happened recently with the DBS data centers, right? There was an outage, and that's because the data center temperature actually exceeded what was possible for the data centers to process information. And so it takes up a lot of water. And what we do is we try to return to the communities more water than we use in our direct operations. In Singapore, the water we use is 100% recycled, so new water. And in countries like India, we actually don't use any water at all because they're very water scarce. And we make sure that we are trying to return and replenish more water to the communities than the water we take out. On the point of sustainable data centers, we also make sure that our data centers in Singapore reach the Green Mark Platinum. So I think I think Amos spoke about that as well. And that means that we're looking at, we are using low carbon concrete, but we're also using green steel. Embodied carbon in the data centers is a big part of our data center emissions. And we're trying to address all aspects of that. Very quickly, I have 30 seconds left. I am almost done. This is an example of a water project that we have in the community. It's in Australia, and we're restoring the water that we're returning to the community restores native vegetation, increases ground cover, and we replenish about 8.5 million gallons a year. So when you go into AWS Cloud, you can also track your energy use and your carbon emissions from that. We have all kinds of data initiatives. I think data is really the enabler to help us achieve our sustainability goals. And without data, there's so many gaps on what actually you can do and what your baseline emissions are. So we have a lot of data programs that actually democratizes access to data, and we put information from agencies like NASA and the Met Office onto an open source platform which researchers and academics can access for free. And this also encourages collaboration and helps them build climate simulation models. Okay, that's it. I'm very happy to answer any questions you may have, whether it's about the private sector or the public sector, where I spent about 15 years in government, also on sustainability issues. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Genevieve. I think Amazon is really doing a lot, because whenever I speak with companies or counterparties involved in green infrastructure or renewable energy, a lot of them mention that they've done work with Amazon. So thank you so much, Genevieve, for charting the path forward. Our next topic is on food security. More than 90% of Singapore's food supply is imported, making food security a very pertinent topic we should be focusing our attention on. Our speaker for this topic is Florence Leong. Florence is an ex-Big Pharma business leader turned startup evangelist. Since leaving Big Pharma, Florence has been involved in the startup ecosystem as a venture capitalist, mentor, instructor, and entrepreneur. She is currently co-founder of Kosmode Health Singapore, a deep tech spin-off from the NUS Food, Science and Technology Department. Kosmode Health is addressing the challenge of functional food security by repurposing food processing waste. The title of Florence's topic today is Food That is Good for the People and the Earth. Achievable? Let's welcome Florence on stage.
Hi. Okay, I'm really glad to have this opportunity to address everybody on this very important topic of sustainability, community, and environment. Okay, I'm going to be very honest. I think man has been very irresponsible. For the longest time, we've been abusing the earth that's been given to us. We overuse, overharvest, not because there's a need for it, but because of economic gains. This has inflicted significant damages to the earth. So, what should we do about it? Should we continue? No, we can't. We have to stop. Because the problem is going to be greater and greater. The global population is exploding, projected to hit 10 billion. It's also fast aging. 1 in 6 will be above 65 years old by 2050. The Food and Agriculture Organization, they've projected that we have to produce 70% more food by 2050. Industrial agriculture is already responsible for 1/3 of greenhouse gas emission. So can you imagine what will happen to the earth if we need to produce 70% more food? What does this mean for the future generation? Think about it. You can see that there's this irreconcilable conundrum. How do we provide adequate nutrition without wrecking the earth, without subjecting the future generations here to an existential threat? Whilst we are struggling with trying to address this challenge of feeding the population with adequate nutrition, do you know that we have been throwing away 200 million tons of food processing waste? It's generated globally every year. Does this sound like waste? Look at the protein contents, as high as 50%, which is easily more than double, even triple that of whole unspent grains. These are gems. Now what are we doing with them? Upcycled. Upcycled into animal feed, fertilizers, but in developing world, they are dumped into the landfill, generating methane, 25% more potent than carbon dioxide. Here, I want to highlight 2 ironies. First, man is struggling. We are extracting protein from whole grains and whole beans, but at the same time, we are dumping this into the landfill. Does it make sense? No. The other irony which I want to highlight is Asia. Asia is the food production hub of the world. But do we know that 50% of the impoverished people resides in Asia? So imagine staying in a food factory, but you're hungry. Sad, inconceivable, but it's happening. It is high time that we make better resources, better use of the resources that's been given to us. We should not only be using grains that have been grown once. We should use it again, give it a second life after the first round of food production. And this is exactly what Kosmode Health, the startup which I've co-founded, is doing. I want to be honest, we did not start out with sustainability in mind. We are health-focused. I was an ex-pharma executive, so I think health every day. So what we want to do is, our mission is to expand access to health from nature, make it affordable to the mass market. Then we realized that sustainability is a means of achieving this mission. We can repurpose things that are thrown away. We can formulate them into functional food that can control blood sugar. So an example of what we are doing is we extract the protein and the fiber from spent barley grains. By the way, how many people have heard of spent barley grains? No. This is a waste stream of beer and malt production. Yes, waste should be minimized. But do you know that certain waste cannot be minimized? Spent barley is an example. How many of you want to stop drinking Milo? As long as you are drinking Milo, you are generating spent barley grains. So the best way to do it is to make better use of it, extract the protein fiber out of it into protein fiber powder. And we formulated a range of functional food for blood sugar control, of which wild noodle has been formulated and is already marketed. It's the world's only functional food that is clinically validated to have zero glycemic response. That's the reason why we call it WOW. But it's spelled W, zero, W. Zero glycemic response is a zero-waste circular product. So you look at the study that has been done in the Glycemic Index Research Unit in Temasek Poly, the blue line represents the blood sugar response of WOW. After eating, you get a 0.3 micromole blip at 30 minutes, and then the blood sugar goes back to baseline. In contrast, yellow noodle, our Hokkien mee, give you a 50% spike in blood sugar. At 2 hours, it's still 20% above baseline. So the reason why we are going for zero is because we want to address the nutritional needs of the Asian aging and diabetic population. So with WOW, it's a source of protein, it's a source of fiber, but it does not affect diabetes. What we want to do is we want to empower the health and restore the pleasure of food. Okay, because many diabetes patients now cannot enjoy the carbs in places where they enjoy it because their staple food, like rice and noodle, is high in carbs. So now if you take away the carbs from your staple food, you can end your whole meal with a chocolate cake, your durian, or your chendol. So this is my last slide. I just want to show you that producing food that is good for health of the people, good for health of the earth is achievable. We have done it. We have shown that this is not a concept, it is feasible. But at the end of the question is, do we have the willpower to do it? That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Florence. We all need to make sure we eat more WOW noodles from now on. Our final topic for the day is on sustainable communities. How do we care for the people around us, and how do we reach out to the vulnerable? Our first speaker on this topic is May Tan. May co-founded Kampung Kakis, a ground-up initiative that has grown into a registered charity aimed at reducing social isolation amongst seniors. May is also passionate about bringing financially underserved communities into the digital economy. In her day job, May serves as Senior Global Partnerships Manager for GoTo Financial, the fintech arm of Indonesia's largest tech giant, the GoTo Group. May received the Social Impact Award by Women in Payments and was awarded the MasterCard CEO Force for Good Award. She was also recognized on the prestige 40 Under 40 list in 2022, Harper's Bazaar's League of Extraordinary Women in 2020, and was nominated for the Singapore President's Award for Volunteerism and Philanthropy. May's topic is, who's going to care for you when you're old? Thank you, May.
Thank you, Bella. I actually asked Jeog to give me a bit more time, so hopefully I won't run into the red flag. Good morning, everyone, distinguished guests, and my fellow RGS sisters. It's really a pleasure to be here today to share a little bit of my experience trying to build sustainable communities today. I'd like to start with a question. And this is something that I've been asked a lot ever since I turned 30, still unmarried, which, by the way, if you're an RGS girl, you might be at risk for. Just kidding. So, who's going to care for you when you're old? Take a moment to think about this. Whenever I ask this question back, the answer I get most often is, my children. A very Singaporean assumption. Well, if you're fortunate, privileged, and lucky, that might come true. But reality can turn out very differently for many of us, and we've seen that in the 500 seniors that Kampung Kakis support today. I'd like to introduce to you my senior Kaki, Madam T. She's over 70 years old, and she has been a widow for over 20 years. Her greatest pride is her only son, who now has a steady career and lives separately with his own family. Typical Singaporean storyline. However, the compounded stress of taking care of her child alone over the years have taken a toll on her mental and social well-being. This strained her relationship with her son. And while her son still fulfills all his filial duties, tries to visit her for a couple of hours every other weekend, Madam T still feels extremely lonely and uncared for. The existing infrastructure and institutional frameworks that are in place are not meeting her social needs, and her isolation has caused her to be a bit spiteful in the way that she communicates with her son. I first got to know Madam T during the circuit breaker period at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, when the Singapore Agency for Integrated Care reached out and asked if we had a volunteer that could help fix her radio, which at the time was her only source of comfort and connection. So my one-off visit turned into a 3-year relationship. Over time, because I stayed so close to her, she actually thought that I was a more accessible helpline. She no longer has to call a hotline that only operates on weekends. She, didn't have to wait a few days for her request to be arranged or formally approved. And I think Madam T's case is really not siloed. A Duke NUS study actually showed that a third of seniors above the age of 60 identify as being lonely. And in fact, over a third of the seniors that Kampung Kakis support have children. Here's another example. The seniors couple's daughter actually lives in the US permanently, and during the pandemic, she reached out to us because she was worried for her parents. She asked if we had someone who could help teach the seniors how to use Zoom and set it up on the iPad. And thankfully, our volunteer was able to do that, and unbeknownst to us, actually provided an additional source of care and comfort during the senior uncle's last days. So I think it is old news by now that Singapore has an aging population problem. By 2030, we will be a super aged nation with 1 in 4 Singaporeans above the age of 65. Moreover, an estimated 83,000 seniors will be staying alone. It is against this backdrop that we confront the systemic problem of our seniors having an unmet need for deeper and longer-term relationships. So how then do we facilitate connection? How do we develop sustainable and deep connections between lonely seniors and the community? At the core of what Kampung Kakis does is actually a neighborhood buddy system. We match anyone who is willing to support an elderly senior neighbor. Our tech backend matches seniors and volunteer Kakis based on proximity, spoken languages, as well as the type of assistance and support that they're willing to provide or receive. We then onboard our volunteer Kakis and equip them to befriend the seniors and provide emotional support. So there are a few things that we've learned over the last 3 years of having Kampung Kakis and how we can create sustainable and deep relationship between seniors and the community. Firstly, lowering the barrier to care. It is the convenience of being close to the seniors' homes, and also the flexibility of our volunteer Kakis being able to visit any time that fits to their schedule that really reduces the mental burden when people think about volunteering. Secondly, increasing the capacity. We do a lot of capacity building with our volunteers, equipping them with resources, as well as our admin team, which actually today is really just my executive director who is in the audience today, Kayok, who acts as a bridge to other formal organizations or services that our volunteer Kakis are unable to support with, such as financial assistance, for example. But lastly, and I think more importantly, is us teaching our volunteers to be just a friend and a really good neighbor to the seniors. It is in this simplicity of very deep, genuine human connection that really sets Kampung Kakis apart in building and creating sustainable longer-term relationships with lonely seniors in the community. However, I think we cannot just stop there. Kampung Kakis today is filling a gap in the community, but how can we stop this gap from widening, right? And I think, just like how as Singaporeans, we are ingrained to not litter, or we are ingrained to queue up in an orderly fashion when we board the train. My hope, and for all our RGS sisters who are still in school today, is that perhaps one day it will be second nature to all of us to actually take the initiative to reach out to our elderly neighbor and collectively care for them. And of course, this will take, a whole lot of mindset shifting and the changing of habits of our people. And this will also require concerted efforts of, government's policy making, media campaigns, on-ground engagement, education, as you are in school right now, as well as parental role modeling for all the parents that are out there with us today. So these are some of the volunteers and senior pairs that we have matched. And you can see they're doing many different activities. Some of them bring them out just for a simple meal in the void deck. Going out, I think one of our seniors had a chance to attend the DBS marina. Yeah, so I think these are really the small things that really make a difference. And it's not, big scale events. And some of us, of our seniors actually prefer to stay alone and tend to shy away from social activities. And a research by National Volunteer and Philanthropy Center actually revealed that more can be done for seniors who prefer to shy away from the crowds. So I know I only have 90 seconds left, but I think in closing, I would just like to bring it back to Madam T, who unfortunately is in her last phases of late-stage cancer. And I think for some of us here who have been a caregiver to a sick senior, you know how destabilizing and confusing it is for them to move through the healthcare system. And that was what happened for Madam T. She was actually transferred to a hospital, from a hospital medical social worker to a palliative care worker. And she was actually thinking that she was being abandoned and left to die. But thankfully, I was there to assuage her fears and explain the process to her, leaning into this trust that we've been able to build over the last 3 years. So I think the key thing that I would like everyone to take away here is that all of us have the capacity within ourselves to support a senior in the community. And I hope that, one day you will be able to do that reaching out on your own. And I'd just like to tie it back to the question, right? So who's going to care for you when you're old? I think for now, at least Kampung Kakis will, but I hope in the future all of us will look out for each other. Thank you.
Thank you, May. I followed Kampung Kakis on a house visit before and have seen firsthand the kind of impact they have on their seniors. So they're doing really wonderful work. I hope that after this conference, everyone will consider signing up as a volunteer with them. So our final speaker, Ms. Sinni Lim, is a Singaporean leader experienced in policy making and implementation across various sectors, including healthcare, finance, labor, and justice. Currently, as the APAC Regional Strategy and Impact Director at the International Justice Mission, Sinni directs teams across the APAC region to support governments in protecting vulnerable people in poverty from violence. In addition to her professional roles, Sinni has held several leadership positions in nonprofit organizations, including being a board member of Care for Children Singapore and a global shaper at the World Economic Forum. Sinni's topic is on how we can build safer communities that sustainably protect vulnerable girls and women. Thank you, Sinni.
Thank you. Good morning. I've been given the honor and pressure of being the last one, I think, today. But I know we've sat through quite a few really amazing, in-depth speeches. So if you want to take a second to just kind of like stretch, I'm not going to blame you. Maybe just a little, yeah. Okay. It's an honor to be here, really, at my alma mater with all these other distinguished speakers who've spoken so knowledgeably on their topic. And thank you to all of you, too, who've made time on Saturday morning to delve deeply into these issues. So today, I wanted to talk a little bit about how we can build safer communities that sustainably protect the vulnerable. In Singapore, I would say most of us feel pretty safe, right? We take many women and girls, walk around freely, even late at night. I mean, I remember when I was in school, I would regularly take the bus home by myself, late evenings after CCA, and without even a second thought. And I know many of us did the same. And the reason is simple, right? Because we know in Singapore, if anyone tries to do something funny, and I think May talked about this a little, right? It's like so ingrained in us, we don't even try. We know if somebody tries to do something funny, the police will catch them, the courts will convict them. You can't get away with it, right? It's almost a fundamental truth. And this safety and security is one of the legacies, right, of our founding Prime Minister, Mr. Lee, that both Jeog and also our Senior Minister of State paid tribute to earlier this morning. But in many other parts of the world, it's not the same, right? Girls, women, and men don't have access to the same protection or basic security. Their ability to thrive is crippled by vulnerability to crime. And that, by the way, in many of these countries are actually already illegal. In fact, 5 billion children, women, and men live outside the protection and benefits of the law in what we call a justice gap. And it's often the poorest and the most vulnerable people who are the least safe, because while their wealthier and more connected neighbors can pay for the security and safety that we take for granted, they can't. So what does that lack of safety look like? For 25 million people in the Asia-Pacific region, it looks like being forced into situations where they work for little or no pay, often with physical or other forms of abuse, and importantly, they don't have the ability to leave. The word slavery can seem really archaic, right, in our modern days, but experts have estimated that the number of people trapped in modern-day slavery today are actually more than ever before in history. And 65% of the 40 million people estimated to be in modern-day slavery around the world are in our region. And what this means is that if we want to uplift the poor, right, which we do, and if we want to provide education, housing, clean water, healthcare, all of these are super important. But none of these are sustainable if people are not safe, right? I don't think I have to convince anybody in this room that good schools for girls is important. But the truth is that girls will not go to school if they don't feel safe walking to that school or going to that school. So the bottom line is simple. If you are not safe, nothing else matters. So this morning, I would like to introduce you to someone called Joy. Joy lives in Cebu in the Philippines. Her father was not in her life, and her mother had to sell her family home and move abroad for work. So as a young girl, she grew up moving from home to home, being shuttled amongst family members. And like any other kid, right, Joy had dreams for her life. She wanted to go to school and become a nurse. But all of this changed when she was 10 years old. Joy said, I remember Boss, that's how Joy refers to this woman, called Boss. Boss called me together with my friends and asked me to go to her house. And then when we were inside, she asked us to take off our clothes and that she was going to take pictures of us. I was so scared, nervous, and confused. I didn't know what to do. But we were already inside Boss's house and we were left with no choice but to follow her instructions. At the mere age of 10, Joy was being trapped in a particularly cruel form of exploitation called the online sexual exploitation of children. In simple terms, this is the in-person sexual abuse of children by adults to create and sell images, videos, and live streams for paying demand-side offenders globally. Basically, predators from all over the world can search online, anonymously wire a payment, and then direct and watch the live abuse of a child from their home. So I can barely articulate, much less process in my mind what this little girl went through. She was horrified, embarrassed, and most of all, scared, because there was no one to protect her. So Joy was subjected to this abuse for 7 years, from the age of 10 until the age of 17. But what Joy didn't know was that there were people who were looking for her. IJM investigators in Cebu were working with the Philippine law enforcement to apprehend her trafficker and stop her from exploiting Joy and other children On the day of the rescue operation, IGM supported the police to arrest Joy's boss and rescued 16 victims, including Joy. She was finally free, finally safe. When she was rescued, Joy was initially scared and unsure of what was happening to her. But IGM social workers were there from the beginning of her journey in freedom, and they spent years working with Joy. One thing is obvious to the IGM staff who know and love Joy. Her past is no match for her strength and resilience. As Joy moved into a long-term aftercare shelter, she remembered her dream of going to school. She began to work in the mornings and go to school in the afternoon, and IGM connected her with a new aftercare partner who supported her education. And after graduating high school, she was given the opportunity to go to college. So Joy's story has a happy ending. But the sad reality is Joy's experience is not unique or an anomaly. The Philippines is a hotspot for this global crime, and reports of online sexual exploitation has exploded in recent years. And because OSEC happens on online platforms, encrypted online platforms, many of which you and I use to keep in touch with our loved ones, one key challenge is even knowing the prevalence of this crime. Like, what is the scale of the harm? So based on a study conducted by the University of Nottingham Rights Lab with the inputs of 24 external multi-sector experts, we found that in 2022, nearly 500,000 children in the Philippines were trafficked, abused and exploited in person by adults to create images, videos, and live streams for sale to offenders around the world. That is 1 in every 100 Filipino children. And the average age of victims was only 11 years old, with the youngest at-risk victim that we've rescued being under 1. And I'm certain that the prevalence today would be even higher had early interventions not been initiated. Kids would be less safe, perpetrators would be more emboldened, and we are confident that together we're having impact to protect children. And all of this may sound really daunting, right? Just talking about the scale and just what we're talking about today. But what I want to tell you today is that we have 25 years of experience strengthening justice systems around the world. In over 20 program offices globally, IGM investigators work with police to rescue women, men, and children like Joy from horrific violence. IGM lawyers work with government prosecutors to arrest and convict the perpetrators. And IGM social workers support social services departments to help the rescued stand on their own feet, overcome trauma, and live successful lives in freedom. Since IGM first started addressing OSEC cases in the Philippines in 2011, we've seen law enforcement, social workers, and the Philippine judicial system step up to bring over 1,000 victims to safety and protect communities in incredible ways. And around the world, IGM has helped to rescue over 100,000 survivors in dozens of countries and represented them in the criminal cases. And what you're seeing here is the impact of 9 IGM projects in a few countries around the world where we have done this work of strengthening justice systems. The crimes vary from sex trafficking of children, forced labor of whole families, land theft of widows, to violence against women and children. The locations also vary across multiple continents, but the solution models IGM builds out in these places works in all these cases. What you're seeing is the result of independent evaluation agencies who measured how much the prevalence of these crimes decreased through strengthened justice systems. We're very data-driven at IGM, so we always want to know what is actually the impact of what we're doing. So you can see on the slide, 79%, 75%, 86%, 73%, 50%, 76%, 80%, 78%, 82%. This is a reduction in the prevalence of these crimes that we're seeing after the work that IGM has done in these countries. When we started our work, we would have been over the moon if we had a 20% reduction in prevalence. Because think of the number of people that you're protecting from that violence. But what we're seeing time and time again as we continue to perfect our offering is the prevalence reduction ranges from between 50 to 86%. Much more work remains to be done in the Philippines and globally and across different sectors, and we continue to work for multi-sector, scalable and sustainable solutions to protect the most vulnerable. But we are convinced that change can be made. criminals can be deterred. Just like in Singapore, girls and women around the world, the most vulnerable, can be safely and sustainably protected so that they can thrive. So to those of you in the audience today, my message is this: you can play a part. Now that you know about Joy and the thousands of children like her and the millions more people around the world who are not safe or free, I encourage you to partner with us to build safer and more sustainable communities. I'm very happy to answer questions later or to connect separately for more detailed discussions. Thank you.
It is our hope that this conference would help to frame your thinking around the concept of sustainability, especially with regards to its complex and multifarious applications in diverse fields. We want to open conversations on how the same principles around sustainability can be applied in different practical ways. With this, we have chosen to assemble a large and diverse panel that you see here that will allow us to draw connections between fields that we may not have previously seen links between. During the speaker series, some of you have sent in questions via the Slido platform. The speakers will try to answer them during this panel discussion. You may continue to send questions through Slido during this panel. So, in addition to the familiar faces we have seen and heard from earlier, Gillian, Genevieve, Dan, Florence, Sinni, May, and Dr. Siti, I would like to introduce two esteemed business leaders whom we have the honor of hearing from today. First up, we have Mr. Brandon Corbin, a PE and VC investor. Brandon serves as Senior Advisor at Actis, a leading global investor in sustainable infrastructure that has raised over $24 billion USD since its inception. He is on the board of directors for EB Impact, a nonprofit organization focused on underserved communities in Asia. Over a career that has spanned more than 20 years, Brandon has also served in senior positions at Olympus Capital, Total Energies, Macquarie Capital, Armstrong Asset Management, and Syndicatum Group. Brandon is passionate about leaving the world a better place. He has led numerous investments into environmentally positive companies, launched regional platforms from a standing start, authored an approved UNFCCC carbon abatement methodology, led over 1 million tons of carbon reduction in Indonesia, and was recognized in the British Expertise Awards for innovative climate change solutions in China. He's been based out here in Asia for 18 years and is proficient in Indonesian Bahasa as well as the Creoles of West Africa, where he grew up. Brandon has just flown back last night from a very busy round of work trips, so we're really grateful that he could join us this morning. The next person. Thank you. The next person I have the pleasure of introducing is Sylvain Reicher de Forges. Sylvain is the Director of Sustainability at Bank of Singapore. He has 20 years of experience in the field of sustainability across sectors and is a firm believer that the most impactful transformations occur through a collaborative approach at the intersection of people, private, and public sectors. Sylvain is the recipient of various accolades, including Singapore's National Environmental Agency Eco-Friend Award, which he received from the Minister for Sustainability and the Environment in 2020. Very happy to have you here with us today, Sylvain. And finally, our moderator today is Junus Liew. Junus is a venture capitalist turned gerontologist and has been investing in technology companies in the US, India, and South Asia since 2011. She is the board director of IMSOL Incorporated. She recently attained her master's in gerontology at Singapore University of Social Sciences and is a recipient of the Alice Lim Memorial Scholarship. Her research explores the importance of financial gerontology and weight training in preparing for longer lifespans. On the side, she also hosts the Building Financial Fitness podcast, where she talks about personal finance and the psychology of money. Over to you, Junus.
Thank you. So thank you to our esteemed panelists today I think we learned a lot over the course of 1.5 hours, even though you guys had very short slots. I think we were able to get a really kind of like a broad view, first starting off with climate change, right then, and ending off with the human rights issues. Like how do we protect the communities that we live in? And we kind of really approach this topic very broadly. And to be honest, this is, we were just talking about it this morning, where this is probably the largest panel I've personally been on, and I think for a lot of us, it might be the largest panel that you guys have seen in your lives, because we have 10 people. And I was going through the questions submitted by the audience, as the talks were kind of going in, and I realized that there was one theme where people wanted to ask about what can I do in my daily life that will contribute towards sustainability, that will actually move the needle. So because I wanted it to be a forum where we can have where everyone can have a takeaway, I just wanted to go kind of down the line where everybody just says, like, what do you do in your daily life that contributes towards sustainability? Just one thing.
Okay, starting off with me. Okay. My daily life is my work, and my work is in sustainability.
Yeah, I could say the same. But I'm just getting something more, maybe more concrete. But something that I did in the last couple of years is just to reduce the amount of meat I'm eating.
I think that what we do should be commensurate with our responsibilities. And so, if you're a CEO or board director, your chief focus should be on, the carbon biodiversity impact of your company or companies or country, for that matter, for those who are in government. If you are an individual, like our students, take a look at what contributes to the, flights tend to be the largest carbon emitters of individuals, other than kids, actually. So if you fly a lot for any reason, that would be one thing to be mindful of, and not just be mindful of, but to cut. So I was down to actually 1 trip per year before the pandemic. There have been some changes, but I think that is, I ensure, or I do my best to ensure that there is a significant probability of decarbonization from my work on any overseas trip. So there is that bar that has to be met. So go for the biggest, not some tiny, if you're the CEO of Starbucks and you do minor recycling in your home, that just doesn't cut it. So focus on what matters. Go for the biggest cut that you can. All right? Thanks.
I think I have to agree with Junus. It's really where you as an individual have the most influence to create that change. This is going to sound controversial, but for me it was to not have any children, because as you mentioned, adding to the population of the planet is, one of the biggest contributors, because we all use up resources, whether we like to believe it or not. So, and I'm not saying that everyone should do this. This is my own personal commitment. But in addition to that, to end it on a slightly lighter note, I'm just that insufferable know-it-all that will tell you all about blue carbon and seagrasses and how you should be donating all your time and resources to conserving them in the effort to combat climate change.
Well, that makes me particularly guilty because I have 3 kids.
No, don't.
No, and I can attest that they do generate a lot of waste. They're very young, and so I'm the one doing all the cleaning up. Well, I think for me, I was rather than identifying specific things, I will say it's more about trying to be more intentional in my daily life. And so, I'm not the CEO of a company, I'm not the CEO of Starbucks, and so I can't make a big change there. But I think in terms of the clothes I choose to buy, or when I buy groceries for my family, like what fish am I buying, and I think trying to inculcate that intentionality in what I do and also what my children do. I think that's just something that I've been trying to do.
I think it's, I see sustainability as a thread that sort of runs through every facet of our lives. If you're lucky enough to be able to work in a profession that's aligned with your values, then the very work that you do will have a positive effect right through to your own personal life. So those personal choices. So being more conscious in terms of the fashion choices, the nutrition choices, these are all individual elements that we can all make.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I mean, I will reiterate many of the comments which were given. I think for the past 20, 30 years, we've been trying to push back to the problem to the individual level. I think it's very important that we make small changes in our daily lives. But I think going back to the big picture issues, such as some of the comments or presentation which were given earlier on climate change, for instance. I think what we really need at this point in time is really large-scale systematic change, going after the big players in the system. I think government definitely need to take the lead, the big corporation, but we also need to accept the fact that all this is going to come at individual level change. So on a personal basis, I don't claim to be perfect, but I think there's a few examples I could cite. For instance, I don't eat much meat, and I also cycle to the MRT every day.
Thank you. Unfortunately, I can't not eat meat. I love it too much. I need my protein, but maybe one day I'll switch to wild foods because there's a lot of protein there as well. I think for me personally, it's really reducing consumerism. I think just overall, I tend to buy very few things. I have one pair of flats that I'm wearing today. I have one bag that I carry every day. I worked in MasterCard for about 8-9 years, and I had a colleague that told me once that hey, I remember you wearing this shirt since your first day in MasterCard. I'm like, yeah, I mean, if we can keep wearing it, why not, right? So I think that's just a little tidbit that I do in my daily life that I hope will help with sustainability. I think the other thing that I do is I turn off all the electricity switches in my house. I think that's good for preventing fire, but also hopefully helping with reducing carbon emissions. I don't know if that's true, but Siti or Dan can tell us. Yeah, thank you.
I totally second her point about reusing your clothes for as long as you can. I still have my my RGS prom dress from when I was 16, and I still wear it. So it has been 25 years, 27 years. So yes, they do last, and fashion trends come in cycles. So what you have now will be fashionable again in 20 years' time. I'm pretty sure of that. So in terms of what I can do at an individual level, it's really about extending the shelf life of the things that you use, right? So not changing your iPhone so much, not changing your electronics or your clothes, your bags or whatever. Try to use them for as long as possible. And then, I think education is quite important as well. For me, it's about educating the older generation, so my parents, who haven't grown up with the same type of, visibility of sustainability issues as the younger generation yourselves have. So everything from, plastic bags and things like that. On a more systemic scale, I'm trying to push internally for the company to commit to higher objectives and goals when it comes to sustainability. And I think once you set ambitious goals, that's the first step in the right direction, right? And then you commit yourself to realizing those goals. Thanks.
Yeah, it's always difficult to be the last speaker when everybody has shared their thoughts. So for me, firstly, as again, founder and a hard push for real estate ESG, right? So that's what comes out from my thoughts before I sleep and when I awake. However, on a more practical scale, I am a mother, so concurring with all the mothers out here, I do look at my children not as waste producers, but how to educate them. So one thing I do, every day, routinely, is to turn down the air conditioning after they have switched it to about 20 degrees. I will turn it up to 28 when they are asleep. So maybe we should do it for this auditorium as well.
Okay, I'm requesting for a last word, okay? Because there's something that really, really irritates me most of the time. And I think that's something which everybody can do for sustainability. That is the best before date. I'll encourage everybody to go back to common sense, okay? See, smell, and eat. Don't make our decision based on something that's been printed on a pack. So I'm known to be eating things that is after expiry, eating drugs that is 6 months after expiry, etc. Because coming from the drug industry, I know that the price of drugs the cost is expensive because there's a lot of wastage. Doctors refuse to buy drugs, okay, that is less than 1 year old. Okay, but actually they are still good. So I will encourage everybody, please eat expired things, but look at it first, okay? Smell it first.
Thank you, Florence. I think I can attest to that. I think I often eat some foods beyond after the expiry date. Yes, it's best before date. But then, of course, like do not kill yourselves by eating like really expired food, because some people have had actually pass away from food poisoning. But yeah, I mean, for myself, it's sort of on a daily basis, on a practical basis, is sort of kind of like how are we more mindful about our choices with our purchase decisions, kind of really extending the useful life of everything that you own. Like fun fact, I wear my sister's Tarbert shirt from 1998 around the neighborhood. I'm known as the person walking around in a red T-shirt. So it's super long. But I wanted to sort of bring us back to the topic of when we talk about sustainability, and Florence, you raised a great point at the start of your presentation today, is that just bringing everybody's attention to the fact that it is we humans who are abusing the earth. And if we think about sustainability, we are the problem, and the reason why we're having this forum is to see how better we can be part of the solution. But when I was looking at the questions, a lot of it was along the lines of greenwashing. So I wanted to address that head on first at the start of this panel. And the question is, how do you identify and address greenwashing with so many companies claiming that their products and activities are ESG?
I think this is a very, very, very good question. And one problem is we don't have any normative definition of what is greenwashing. And so therefore, anybody can put behind this term whatever he or she wants. So we could maybe come up together and try to agree on a common definition of what is greenwashing. I can maybe make a proposal if you want. So my definition of greenwashing, or rather what is not greenwashing, would be something, a project, an organization, a government, whose action is compliant with the objective that we have set. The objective is to limit global warming to 2 degrees. So everything which is compliant with this objective is not greenwashing. Everything which is not compliant with this objective is greenwashing. If you accept this initial definition, then you can go further. To be compliant with 2-degree objective means to reduce emissions of greenhouse gases at a certain rate, which has been described by the IPCC. So if you accept the objective of 2 degrees, you accept this reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. And if you accept this trajectory of reduction of greenhouse gases, you can deduce 3 easy criteria, assessment criteria, to assess any project, organization, country. The first criteria is the reduction in absolute terms must start now. Everything which starts in 3 years, in 5 years from now, not good enough. Reduction in absolute terms must start now. Second assessment criteria would be the perimeter of reduction must encompass the full perimeter of the organization. If an organization reduces emission for scope 1, scope 2, but ignores scope 3, not good enough. And the third criteria is any solution which is implemented to achieve this reduction of emissions must be scalable beyond the perimeter of the organization. If you take one company which proposes something, then this company must check that this solution is still valid if all the other companies of the sectors are doing the same thing. Otherwise, it means that this solution is not scalable and therefore not good enough. So that would be my definition of what is not greenwashing.
So I would beg to differ. First of all, I think the assumption, I don't know when we move from 1.5 to 2. I don't believe there's any evidence at all that shows 2 Celsius warming is survivable. Maybe for some. That's not going to be a very good life. You might not want to be living in a bunker for the rest of your lives, eating, goodness knows what. But for the majority, you would either be dead or climate refugees. So don't shoot for 2 Celsius. You might end up at 3. I think that's frankly one of the greatest misconceptions or most dangerous assumptions the world is making today. And even though I'm not a climate scientist, I would note that actually GIC's Global Head of Sustainability has on LinkedIn in the public domain that we in 2018 ahead of the UN IPCC, so a bunch of 200 climate scientists putting forth their report, projected 4 Celsius as the baseline for the world based on the path that we were on in 2018. Okay, 4 Celsius. So any let up in urgency, not just in talk, but in action, is dangerous. That's why we are here, FYI. Now, the second part, while I agree that we want, a whole of organization, whole of country, whole of, whatever, effort at reducing carbon emissions, look, if we can reduce energy use in, let's say, the aircon, or we switch to using solar panels, as Haslinda tells me RGS is going to install to add to, the platinum certification that RGS has now, I would encourage that. Any reduction in energy is good. I would also encourage that, we go further as a company, as a country, as a whatever. But any reduction in carbon emissions has to be applauded. Okay? Celebrate the good and then advance that. So I would applaud those who are able to reduce scope 1 or 2 and, go on to scope 3. Don't stop there, right? That we don't know what green is, so we can't tell what greenwashing is. That is not true. So there have been criminal lawsuits brought in Europe. So the EU tends to be world leaders on this front. A bank, not any bank here in this auditorium, a bank has been sued by the country regulators and probably by the EU as well, I can't remember, for greenwashing because they are lying to us. They are lying to their countries. They are lying to consumers. We buy certain things because they say they are cutting back on their fossil fuel financing activities, right? So they get our money, and we expect that our money with them helps improve the planet. If they lied, they are getting that money for nothing. And we have been deceived. That's why those bankers face a criminal lawsuit. That's fair. Another airline, there are companies that have gotten into trouble. So there are greenwashing standards. Those who wish can Google, EU, SFDR, and, whatnot. There's a ton now, right? Various continents. So there is that. A simple one, if you're a student, if you're an individual, and you don't want to, look at country regulations, is does it reduce carbon emissions? There are various ways of looking at it. Biodiversity is absolutely key. There are other factors like waste and whatnot. But there tends to be at least one specific measure. And if a company wants to make such statements, the onus is on them, not on us to do homework, on them to show, to prove that there is, in fact, substance behind those claims. And I think there's a role for policymakers and regulators to ensure that that's done.
Test, okay. Only to add a footnote to that conversation, every time the topic of climate change comes up and emissions reductions is a little bit of a glass half empty type of way of looking at it. I think the glass half full way, the real measure I think is parts per million in the atmosphere of CO2, ultimately. And everything that we do and we generate every day just adds to this amount, which makes the problem worse. So yes, we need to work on the demand-side management solutions in terms of limiting what goes in, but we need to start exploring active solutions in reducing back to a sustainable level that carbon density within the atmosphere. And I think there's only two solutions right now. There's simplistically a mechanical solution via direct air capture, and then there's the organic, which is essentially forestry. So the more biodiverse forests that we have, ultimately these are the lungs of the planet. These are the sinks for carbon. And there isn't really an effective framework yet to catalyze and incentivize more of that.
Yes, thank you. Maybe to go back to the question on greenwashing, I think it's appropriate that I address this because I'm from Bank of Singapore. So this is a topic we've been looking quite actively over the last few years. So you probably know that within the investment financial sector, there's been quite a number of big law cases of very large financial institutions being involved in greenwashing allegations. So when we start to look at the reasons for that, it's quite simple. If there's a mismatch between what is communicated to the public, for instance, on so-called ESG penetration values, and what is actually done within the company in terms of meeting this expectation, if there's any mismatch, and if this is brought to the public, well, it's not surprising that this will be categorized as greenwashing. So the easy answer is that that should not be done. So the way we look at it is, going back to some earlier comments, I think it's very important to have alignment within, not just within a particular entity, should it be a bank or a corporation, but to also align with the rest of the peers within the industry. Otherwise, there's a big gap, a big mismatch in terms of how corporations self-define what is right, what is sustainable, and what is not sustainable. And that's been quite apparent in the financial sector for too long, especially in the investment sector. When we started to look at certain topics, what we found very quickly is that there's been quite a lot of work done within the broader financial sector, but not so much targeting the private banking sector in terms of regulations, in terms of guidelines, and so on. So what we started to do 3 years ago is really to start to engage with, not just within our own corporations, because we're part of a bigger group, OCBC. So we wanted to first align on methodologies, on even definitions of that were differing within the group. So we done this first, and then we scaled this up quite fast in terms of bringing the industry together. So about a dozen private banks to align precisely on what should be the general direction in terms of private banking to adopt more sustainable practices. Because we felt this alignment, what we're seeing is all banks going in their own direction, making their own definitions, and I don't think that's good for the industry as a whole, and it's also confusing the stakeholders, including the investors and broader stakeholders. So I do agree. I think alignment and working within peers within the industry is very important to come up with a set of guidelines, and that's precisely what we've done by setting the region's first guidelines on sustainable investment. I think this serves as a generic guidelines. Of course, private companies, individual companies still have their individuality in terms of how they adopt this and the initiatives they come up with. But I think setting industry-wide policies is very important.
It's a really quick point on combating greenwashing. I think the role of data here is very critical. So I'll keep it short, but I think the role of technology, including AI, ML, remote sensing, satellite imagery, in monitoring, verification, and reporting, will go a long way in terms of validating the ESG data. And I think that's absolutely key to combating greenwashing.
I just wanted to build on Brandon's point about investing in nature that's already doing this job of carbon capture and carbon sequestration. I think the financial mechanisms that we need to enable those to happen is critical. But with respect to greenwashing in this space, I don't know how many of you have read that Guardian article that talked about all these fake credits from forestry. So that's a huge issue, right? So unfortunately, in this space, there's always someone out there who's willing to exploit loopholes to make a quick buck. And I think stronger science and methodologies is one of the key things, obviously, but also I think as consumers, and I know you made a point that, no one's, we're not expecting everybody to be carbon experts or climate experts, but I think, as consumers, we have the duty to question those claims, right? So when, I hope I don't get called out by Adidas for this, but when Adidas said that their shoes are now net zero, I think it's our job as consumers to ask that question. How is it net zero, Adidas? Tell us more, right? So, and then looking into those value chains. And of course, investigative journalism is part of this, but there needs to be also in creating some of that reputational risk that journalists have done in the past. So the other example is that whole thing in Singapore where Reuters tracked some of your shoes that you donate because they said it was going to go towards making all these other products, and it ended up one of their contractors actually broke his contract and sold it on somewhere else just to make a quick buck, right? So I think enforcement is needed, but we also as consumers need to ask questions. And when we do these investigations, I think the laurel leaf needs to be handed out to the companies, kind of like what you said, right? It's great that you're reducing this much. Now what else are you doing? So it's great that we found this out, right? And how are you going to address this issue of greenwashing or these loopholes that need to be addressed? So I think as consumers, maybe that should have been my answer instead of having no children. But as consumers, I think it's our responsibility to actually ask that question, right? We need to be more conscious consumers. And I think a lot of people touched on this point. You need to be more deliberate and more conscious about your choices. Even where you go on holiday, right? There's so many chain resorts and a lot of them are claiming to do things. Find out. A lot of them say oh, we have this coral restoration program. I'm not going to name which one. I went to one and they said, we have a marine biologist on site. I was like, perfect, gonna talk to this person. Doesn't exist, right? So what do? You've already paid all that money. So I wrote an angry letter as a Singaporean would and, managed to get a response and then ask them, so what are you gonna do about this, right? You've put this in all your pamphlets. I know not many people go around seeking out marine biologists, but you need to put your money and your actions, into force.
Yeah, thanks, Siti. I love that you kind of approached it from a consumer standpoint, because I think for us as consumers, that's the most relatable, and ultimately we vote with our dollar. Where do we spend our money on? And even when we look at marketing slogans, are we actually questioning the intent? Is it just a marketing slogan for us to put money there, or is it really backed by the real work that's done behind it? And talking about us as consumers, and we kind of link that to carbon emissions. But if we look at the largest contributor of carbon emissions is really in terms of construction. I think it contributed to some 42% of carbon emissions. And some of the questions that came was around, in built environment. It was questions to Gillian and Amos, who is not on the panel. But, one of the questions is, have there been reports that actually kind of show that these BCA green mark things, do they actually help?
Well, BCA, it does come about. I'm speaking on behalf of them. Yes, studies have been shown that with this BCA Gold Plus, and Platinum, there's a difference in energy and GHG emissions. So if that's the question, whether there are studies, definitely there are studies. Yeah, we can refer to many websites, globally as well. Architecture2030.org has a lot of statistics to show us that the built economy or the built environment is really one to be reckoned with. In fact, a claim has been made, really not dissing everybody else who's not in the built economy or built environment, as long as we stop and eliminate a certain percentage, a significant percentage, 1.5 will not be reached in 2030. Yeah, so I'm feeling very stressed in my space of participation, right?
But not to further stress you out, so we have one more question for you, which is whether or not Singapore should implement a minimum period before buildings can be demolished, because the view is that too many youngish buildings are being demolished and rebuilt for profit. So what's your take on that?
A very interesting question. Genevieve also asked me that because I made a point that Shenton House, if those of us are old enough to remember, Shenton House used to be a new building, but today it's not. But it's not old enough to be torn down. However, I'm not IOI, neither am I the chairman who spent 538 million. However, to buy the building, and the plans have been approved for reconstruction, demolition and reconstruction, to attain a 25% higher GFA, gross floor area, if you put in hospitality, residential, etc. It's part of the URA's move to basically improve the quality of living, because what we have noted for the last 10 years is that if you go to the CBD over the weekend, you can hear a pin drop. Right. So we have very expensive real estate, highly underutilized. Why? Because we're not living there. So as part of the planning urban renewal, as the name suggests, things has to be done, and unfortunately demolition is part of it. And then hence is a vicious cycle, right? We contribute back to the carbon footprint. We have Amos there teaching us basically materials that we can use to reduce that damage. But then it's a good balance of ESG. Coming back to real estate, E is the only major thing that we can measure most of the time. But for real estate, the S is very important because it touches lives and it's society and social, right? And everything around there, and it's difficult to measure, right? So the answer is, so if you're going to think of just the age of a building, who says old is not good? Right? Sorry, speak for myself. Okay, so the age of the building doesn't mean that it's obsolete. Yeah, the measurement of when it needs to be torn down is usually highest best use, as well as obsolescence in other forms. Maybe it's beyond repair, right? Although the facade still looks good. Yeah, so to answer, we have no age limit, thankfully, that you should tear down or can be torn down. However, there's heaps of planning approval that needs to be crossed before a building is demolished. I hope I answered that question.
Yeah, thank you for kind of answering that on the demolition part. Do you want to?
So I'm not a built environment expert, but I strongly support that question. Because I think we know that the majority of the carbon emissions from the built environment is actually embodied. So reducing aircon usage, etc., electricity and all that, that is important. It does matter. But tearing down buildings that are less than 10 years, less than 15 years, less than 20 years old, most of them have no structural impairment. So I think that we certainly don't want structurally unsafe buildings. I don't think anyone in the climate space advocates that. I have not come across much evidence. I mean, I don't think we need a debate on this, but it would make sense to review policies on that front. On the carbon emissions calculations for the built environment, we do have green cement and whatnot that is undergoing R&D. I have been told at Davos this year that we will have significant breakthroughs in the next few years. So I think going forward, the incentive for developers and whatnot, everyone in that space, is that going forward, one of the best ways for companies to reduce their emissions is to be in buildings that are greener. That's just obvious. And so if you have a whole portfolio of high emitters for whatever reason, then you are going to be stuck. Remember this phrase, stranded assets. They refer to fossil fuel plants, fossil fuel fields, related infrastructure, all related infrastructure, and things like high-emitting buildings. These are just examples. You can think of others that will be liabilities in the near future. All right, so there's a moral responsibility, but we're not relying on that anymore. Because everyone who cares, have been in it for a while. The ones who have been joining the last few years recognize the business imperative. And that's what we're counting on, right? When we talk about Adam Smith and the invisible hand, we are counting on people acting in their self-interests. And I think the economic case is clear for most, if not all, industries. And if it's not clear, look further.
So kind of just following on to the point, sorry, Brendan, do you have something to add?
Only to add a little anecdote to both of that on the topic of the built environment, which is really, really important, and on the right incentives, which I think is ultimately what's going to catalyze change. I was in London last year and I was invited to the office of a group called the Four Partnership, and I don't know if you've come across them before. Set up a £300 million fund set up by a tech entrepreneur out of the US who'd obviously made a lot of money, and allocating capital towards sustainable investing in the built environment. And I'm a complete Neanderthal in this particular area. I am not a real estate guy at all. But I went in, and what they've done is they've set up their office as the showroom, effectively, of how things can work. And building stock in London and Paris and parts of Europe are obviously very, very old, been there a long time. And almost all of them are not going to meet new energy efficiency and environmental requirements that are coming in place. I think in 2030, it's coming up pretty quickly. And so what they're doing is they're buying up all of this stock, both for commercial, residential purposes, and they're completely gutting them out and rebuilding them from the inside. And the little touches were really startling. There's a certain type of paint that you can use, which neutralizes the CO2 in the atmosphere and kills bacteria and viruses, for example. So the choice of materials, the choice of energy efficiency, there's data that's in there on the parts per million of carbon in the atmosphere, the humidity, the temperature, pretty much everything. Motion sensors all over the place so that you can figure out where people are, gravitating to, where they're using it. Maybe you've designed a new office with a snug and a sort of fireplace, but actually nobody uses it. Well, you can use that data and be more efficient in terms of how you actually optimize it. So I'm just curious on your thoughts on whether or not there's scope for that in Singapore with younger building stock, but still potential.
Thank you, Brendan. I think he just wrapped up my career in terms of fund management in real estate, where we do thematic investments in terms of ESG implementation. There are possibly 6 or more ways, according to CFA, of implementing ESG into real estate. And what you've just spoken about and shared is the brown to green thematic investment, right? And in our world, basically, it's again about the underlying IRR, internal rate of return, forecast over the next 10 years, simulated over the next 30 years, if we can, right? And the impact on both our investors, or they may not stay with us for 30 years, primarily bringing it back to the ESG implementation process. The question, 2 questions. So earlier on when Vivian expounded, I totally agree with Vivian, However, my stand was that no putting an age to the building, because there's a lot more to that than just to demolish just based on age. To Brandon's point, absolutely. We call it the value add or the opportunistic play in terms of fund management, private equity or VC, etc. So when you're looking at the opportunity to acquire, right, and redevelop or refurbish and upgrade. That's where all the technology and everything that you've mentioned, from the coat of paint to the type of installations that you're putting in, as well as the use, will come in. And this actually overarching looks at the aging population and how we should be designing buildings not only to look good, to be green, but also to suit the use of our aging population, the silver economy. So there's plenty of scope for that, plus green financing that we need, especially in the current high interest rate environment. We need a lot of support from experts who can actually look at what we're doing to say that this one actually is very good. So I'm going to give you a discount to the interest rates by 300 basis points. Example.
Thank you.
I don't see a smile on
Florence,
Sylvan's face, but
Florence, you had something to add?
Yeah, I'm no expert in real estate, but I have got these observations, and I've always been wondering, because a lot of private homeowners, like around my place, I realized that they build and rebuild their houses very often, sometimes as often like every 3-4 years. So maybe the government should, put some sort of carbon tax on them. I don't know.
That's coming. That's absolutely coming. Very brilliant, especially landed homes. I mean, she must be talking about landed homes because we're not rebuilding a condominium every 3-4 years. So you are right. The change of hands of landed homes basically will then, cause this particular spiral of higher, bigger, nicer, flashier buildings in your neighborhood. Carbon tax has been implemented a while back, but it wasn't effective at $5 per ton. Nodding away, Amos will know that it will increase by 5 times next year. And then a couple more years later, by 2030, $80, $50 to $80. Right, so hopefully that would then be the stick for you to keep on just building nicer, better homes. I'm not sure, but then those who can pay it. I wanted to just end on one point that Junus and I were saying. It's about the mindset of being content. Ultimately, I know this is not a moral lesson. We're not here to preach about anything. But if you're not content, you always want bigger and better. So studies have shown the top 1%, talking about income per capita, top 1% generates 1,000 times more carbon footprint than the bottom 1%. So what's that?
Thank you. I think that...
I would like to just add a quick note on this. So first on the role of financial institutions. So very quickly, definitely I think there's a big role that investors and financial institutions can play in terms of supporting more sustainable building structures. So one example is we were actually the first private bank to incorporate ESG risk analysis in the financial loans for properties. So practically what this means is that properties which perform better in terms of the sustainability assessments, they will get preferential rates. But I just wanted to get back on an interesting comment regarding the age of the building. I find this question quite interesting because I recall being at a conference in Germany a few years back, and they were rolling out some new government buildings there with the latest technologies in terms of having the solar panels covered on the rooftops and energy efficient glass and all these new high techs going into the building. And there was a very interesting remark within the audience of a company that specialized in measuring the the carbon footprint or the life cycle of buildings. And he was just comparing a recent study he had done on a 14th century castle, across the border in France. And he was just making the remark that, based on our studies, the 14th century castle is actually 64% more energy efficient than your latest technology. So the point I want to make is that I think we have become a bit obsessed by technology and defining like a sustainable building as a building incorporating all the latest, captors and technologies and solar panels or whatever it is. And perhaps sometimes we need to rethink the concept of what really is a sustainable buildings. For me, for instance, A sustainable building is a building which is well built from the start, which means has been engineered at the design stage to be energy efficient. So not just a normal building which we retrofit with the latest inputs and technologies to make it, to compensate for the fact that it's not energy efficient to start with, but a good design. And I'm very supportive of the so-called concept of living buildings, whereby you have buildings which are well designed that mimic nature. There's some very good case studies, for instance, of buildings inspired by termites nests in Africa, which have a chimney effect in the center, and really just by design are energy efficient. And on top of that, the concept of buildings which actually give back to the environment more than they actually take. For instance, like buildings which capture rainwater, filter it through a range of plant systems within the building, and then redistribute this to the nearby communities, or even on the energy efficiency side, buildings which produce more energy than they need and redistribute and sell back the energy to the grid. So the point I wanted to make, I think it's not so much about the age of the building, but the fact that the entire concept of sustainable buildings, and I think there's very good case studies in Singapore which start to get closer to this concept of urban greenery, technology, and good design from the start. So,
yeah, thanks for the point. I think definitely, I think you also addressed another question that was also on the on the Slido, where are we actually kind of using technology just for the sake of, or are we actually using technology to really solve the issue of reducing carbon emissions? But I also wanted, cognizant of time, that I wanted to address like the most upvoted question on Slido today, which is, do people in the climate industry really believe in saving the planet, or is it to make profits through investing in sustainability solutions? And like there were a lot of questions sort of in the same vein, right? Where it's like, how do we get triple bottom line? How do we balance economic profitability with actual sustainability? And I sort of just wanted to put this out to the floor because I think it impacts everyone here.
Maybe I'll try to take this question. I think in my presentation, I did talk about how actually by being both environmentally friendly when profitable, you actually get higher returns, right? As a business, it's a twin engine of business. And I think increasingly, there are very real returns from being sustainable because your investors are starting to look at the sustainability aspects of your business, right? I'm not just talking about consumers and consumers individuals, but I'm talking about institutional investors, the people who are financing your activities. These are increasingly aspects that they're looking at, and a level playing field in terms of reporting will actually be introduced across the world, and we're seeing increased reporting that is mandatory across the region, not just in the EU and in the US, but with the implementation of the ISSB in APAC, we're going to be seeing increasing reporting, and this is really for decision useful information for investors, right? And I'm sure that my colleagues here will attest to that as well. So increasingly it's important for investors, and therefore it's going to be important for businesses.
I mean, I can add a comment on that. And if we go back to what is sustainability, at the very heart of the question of what is sustainability, to be sustainable, you cannot consume more than, if the resource is fixed, you cannot consume more than you put back. If there's a natural replacement rate, you cannot consume more than that. So at the heart of everything, if we agree that that principle applies, then it seems to make sense that if you're starting a business, working for a big company, thinking of investing in a business, that you should lean your efforts towards those companies that have that DNA built into them. Everyone else is at some form of existential threat, which then seeps over to all of us. Some places, private capital can contribute, and there is the profit motive. There's other places that are best suited to government, and there's other places that are best suited to the non-profit sector. But taken collectively, they all have a role to play.
Florence?
Okay, I believe that I'm probably the smallest company here, startup. Okay, I'm the one who goes around carrying the bagging bowls for business, for investors. And my observation is that whilst there's a lot of talk talk about VCs, PEs, talking about investing in sustainability. And when I approach them, okay, it's always good work. We've won many awards, the most recent being the Singapore International Chamber of Commerce Most Transformative Collaboration Award, etc. But when you ask for investment, the question always is, oh, you're too early. You have not generated enough revenue, blah, 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 blah. And even for those who are interested in investing, because we have been financing the business ourselves from our own pocket, sometimes I feel that I've been punished for being financially prudent because, oh, then you are pre-seeds. So pre-seeds valuation should be this amount. So really, sometimes I think there's a lot of talk about, oh yeah, we are investing, giving money in sustainability, but I might sound cynical, but the reality on the ground is that don't seem to be the case.
Anyone else who hasn't spoken?
I would like to just concur with startups. I told you that I help my daughter with Nong Shri, right? The first word they say, you're doing impact investment where? In Singapore? How much is your GDP per capita? How big is your population? Is it scalable? And then you get all the negative side of things. So kudos to WOW. Yeah, I will definitely try it. Please support her, everybody. It's difficult to be a startup, very difficult.
I mean, I want to kind of like chime in on that, coming from somebody who's worked in VC, right? If you look at venture capitalists, their role is to generate ROI for their GPs, the people that they took money from. And that's sort of a very, as much as there's like that talk about sustainability, or you want to, like support the elderly, for example, all this they kind of like do good themes, they're still very much focused on the return on investment. And I think when I look at the questions, a lot of it is sort of like, is it hypocritical if people talk about sustainability when they're actually trying to generate profit? I mean, that was like an underlying theme that I saw in a lot of the questions. And if I think about that, I mean, when we look at sustainability, it's not just with like private organizations, it is the work of governments with policy making, it is, for consumers, how do we vote with our dollar? It takes everybody in the ecosystem to sort of contribute that and not just singularly focus on profits, to sort of like change that discussion that you're having with VCs on like, oh, you're too small, sorry, we're not going to support you because,
Okay.
So I just want to highlight that I was from the VC. So when we make an investment, it's like, okay, how many times return on investment? How many X can you make? So having been both on the fund giving side and the fund bagging side, sometimes, yes, I think there's this level of hypocrisy.
As a social entrepreneur, I feel your pain. As an advisor to some of the sovereign wealth funds that and some institutional investors and so on, there are reasons that there are certain criteria for each class. But there is hope. There are impact investors that are fine with essentially, blended returns, both financial and social. And I think that I know of investors and business patriarchs who are seriously looking at, essentially focusing more on the social impact side of things. So I think, if you Google the Philanthropy Asia Alliance by Temasek Trust, a few friends are anchor investors in that, anchor partners, my apologies. The focus there is more on impact, not on finance. However, we do need, you know, everyone, all parts of the ecosystem. So banking, you know, great carbon credit projects, you know, blue and all, emissions reduction, like I said just now. So we do need everyone to be on board, okay? But I want to come back to the question that was posed, because I don't think we've actually addressed it head on. And I don't think that you're going to get one answer, because we are all different people, we have different values, we are willing to bear different pain. So there's a lot of talk about passion. If we rephrase passion as, for what are you willing to suffer for? Not what do you enjoy doing or what do you like to post on social media about. The question changes, doesn't it? If you truly care about something, like, you know, no one would voluntarily run in front of a vehicle, but I think ask any mother or ask any parent here, you know, if your child is there, then you would. It's unfortunate that there's a car coming, but that's the whole point that you're rushing in, right? So, and I'm not, so motivations vary. I think that from the way people speak, you can get a sense of where their values are and what drives them. But there are also other ways, right? How do we lead our lives? Do we talk about sustainability, but our own lives are sort of, you know, not really a great example? And I don't want you to hold every, so I think there are exceptions. So if you look at, you know, let's say ministers, UN, and so on, for them to build alliances, to bring about effective, you know, reduction, technology adoption, you know, whatever, there is a certain amount of face-to-face discussions, corralling, etc., that's needed. Some of the most difficult questions, some of the most difficult decisions can only be done face-to-face. Zoom doesn't cut it when you're asking for difficult trade-offs. So there are some that are justifiable, but for most of us, we are not, you know, heads of the UN or ministers or whatever. So there's a certain amount that's necessary. The rest is sort of, you know, up to that person to decide. So I think that there are ways you can tell.
Yeah, I like what you said on like what are we actually willing to suffer for, and do we actually walk the talk? And I wanted to sort of build on what Gillian said, where it's basically, you know, as humans, is a, I don't know, I call it an inherent flaw that we're not content. And there was another question here, which is, you know, we assume economic health requires constant growth, consumption, and building. And I wanted to pose this more existential question is there any accepted model where we don't continue building and consuming?
Somehow I feel so during COVID, we all consume less. Definitely the world built less. Carbon emissions dropped by how many percent? Give a guess. Oh, we have the expert there, I'm sorry. No need to guess. 5%? Okay, how come I have a different statistics? Anybody else? Anybody else? Well, the statistics I had was 10%. Sorry, maybe we will debate that outside. Between 5 to 10% then. Anyways, it was 10% because I was lecturing on Zoom with a mask in NUS, and I was looking at these figures. And then the next year, I looked at a different set of figures during Zoom. Yeah, and it was a difference of 10%. And I went like, wow, don't build, don't go out. Everything will be better. Yeah, but can we do that? Yeah, so. So depressing. No. No,
if I may, I would like to come back to this concept of what are we willing to suffer. There is this idea that the transition to low carbon economy could be viewed as as something about renunciations. We need to fly less. We need to eat less what we like. We need to do less of some of things. We need to buy less cars, etc. But there's really another way to look at it. The other way to look at it is actually to take this opportunity to reflect on our lifestyle, on what we really like to do compared to what we do on our daily life, and to see if we cannot use this transition obligation as an opportunity to transform our life into something better. I do run a lot of climate education workshop, and I like at the beginning when we do an introduction round. So I like to ask people who attend, okay, who are you? Tell us your name, etc. What you do, and tell us something personal about you, something you like to do. What most people would say at that time is what they like to do is to spend time with family, to spend time with friends, to do sport, to read more, to do music, things like that. And then at the end of the workshop, I ask them, okay, do you think you do enough of the things you mentioned at the beginning, the things you really like? And everybody says, no, I don't spend enough time with my family. I don't spend enough time with my friends. I don't have enough time to do sport or to do art or to read. Why? Because we are embarked in our society where we receive a lot of stimulation to do a lot of things. So actually, the low carbon transition, it's an opportunity for us to rethink our values, our model, and what we like and how we would like our life to be, to make it better. If I don't use my car and I take a bike to go to work, it's not a renunciation. It's an improvement in my life. Because, okay, it will be good for the climate. I will emit less carbon. But actually, if I use a bike every day, I will be in better health. And also my mind health will be improved. So it's not a renunciation, it's an improvement. That's how we should look at it.
Brendan?
Thanks so much for that reminder. I think that perspective is super important. On that note, I also want to I want to say that we can be optimistic as far as possible if we can come up with new innovations to address some of these problems, right? So if you're looking at the energy consumption of data centers, I mean, everything that we're using today, from the internet to cloud-enabled services to your photos in your phone, actually the demand for energy is really, really very significant. But according to the International Energy Agency, actually, despite the exponential growth in internet-enabled services and cloud-enabled services, the total demand of energy from data centers has remained essentially flat in the past decade, right, despite the exponential growth in services. So this boils down to energy efficiency and innovation to that end. So if we can continue innovating, we'll actually be able to maintain or in fact even reduce our energy demand. And I think the role for technology and innovation is really critical.
I'll only add that actually, let me second the whole idea of innovation. I think as a generation, this is maybe the first generation that's kind of grown up post the Industrial Revolution, coming to grips with the consequences of the Industrial Revolution and starting to rethink how everything is done. It's a little bit like the story of if you've ever been to an elephant park, unfortunately, they're not great things. Elephants should be out in the wild. But you'll see a very powerful animal chained to a little stake in the ground. And you ask why. And the animal is conditioned to that because when they were young, they were chained to that same stake and they didn't have the strength and power to break free. And as they grow older, they stop trying. And so there's an element in all of us in sort of, we're born into the world, we see things the way they are, and sometimes we don't see it with a fresh perspective. And I'll illustrate that with an example in air travel, for example. Airplanes have not changed since the beginning of the jet age. They're just essentially a cylinder, 2 jet engines, and they run on kerosene. And they get a little bit more efficient each year. But there's no push factor for Airbus and Boeing and the various designers to come up with something radically different. The first push factor actually came around COVID and the society going, let's take a step back and wow, we can actually drop emissions here. Do we need to fly? And so that a lot of the financing, the bailouts that went to the airlines and the manufacturers came with conditions that they had to accelerate some of these green programs, whether that's electric aircraft with batteries, hydrogen, or alternative fuels. So the question from the oil and gas industry tends to get thrown at us. You stop flying less, you stop consuming less. We're still going to produce what we're going to produce. We're still going to fly those planes, but actually the guilt is on you. In 5 or 10 years, we could revolutionize the way we move around in a way that there is zero impact. And then you can move as much as you want. Because in theory, that should be to the net benefit of humanity. It's just that at the moment, what we've inherited, it comes with a cost. And now I think we're the first generation that's truly aware of that cost.
Thank you, Brandon. And first of all, I want to thank Jeog for giving me slightly more time, because I realized that, we have around 20 minutes left. And because of that, I wanted to focus attention on the human aspect of things, especially given that me and Sinni, you guys have actually shared a lot, with regards to, how do we have empathy for, the people around us, especially for the marginalized communities. And I just wanted to pose, there was one question to me where, I think, a member of the audience just shared this, right, where she said, I struggle with guilt when I think about volunteering to care for seniors when I have limited capacity for my own parents. And I kind of wanted to extend this question, maybe not just to seniors, but marginalized communities around us. And it's not just like seniors is one of them. Sex workers could be one of them. How do we have more empathy for the larger community?
Yeah, I guess that question is for me. So, I do think it's not easy. I think, like I mentioned, it requires a mindset shift. I think if you can ask yourself, would you reply a friend's text? Would you pick up the phone when your friend calls? Sometimes it's as simple as that. I give my senior Kaki my number, and she only calls me maybe once a week. It's a WhatsApp video call. Even just a 5-minute call, she actually feels that, she's being connected and she's being cared for. It can be as simple as that. And so if you can pick up the phone, even if you one day live overseas, for the RGS girls that are here, I'm sure you'll have the opportunity. Remember to call your parents, just a simple 5-minute phone call. I think, that can do a lot. And from there, that's how you slowly build, right? It takes practice. So once you get into that mindset of being able to understand that it doesn't take that much to connect with someone or to show someone that you care, then more and more you will find that capacity within yourself to be able to give. And I think it always starts with a place of love. I think someone in the audience said to love yourself first. Yes, that's true. You need to love yourself first. And then you can be able to have that kind of love to also share with others. And if you do things from a perspective of love, then I think you will always find enough within yourself to give. It's just like parents. How many moms here have a day job? They still need to keep fit. I always look at Jen and how do you have 3 children and look so brilliant, beautiful, right? So, you just find it within yourself to give to your kids, right? So if you love your parents enough, you'll be able to do it. And I think if you have enough love for the community and the friends and people around you, and you don't see seniors as a burden, we see them more as a friend, someone I can learn something from. They have so much to give from their life experiences. And when you come from that perspective, maybe you'll be able to find the strength and time to give. Yep.
Sinni?
Yeah, thanks, Junus. I think I would say the first thing to start with is just awareness. It's just, in Singapore, we're very blessed. We live in a very safe, protected community where things generally work. And I think the main thing is understanding, that others may not be in the same position, but also the impact of the things that we do, right? That each of us really can have an impact. I think, going back to the very first question we talked about, right? Yes, we may not all be in the same position to make large amounts of impact. And yes, maybe in the grand scale of things, the small things that we do may not really matter, but it does matter because it changes the mindset. It changes the way we think about these things, whether we think it's important or not. And if all of us think that it's important, then it becomes important, right? And so I think that, and then that also comes back to that, I'm so enjoying the questions that have been asked today because I love that it's coming from this audience as well, right? And so some of the things that we've been talking about here today, the mindset shifts that need to happen, the different ways we need to start thinking about these things. I mean, I'm looking at the RGS girls in the audience and you guys are the future, right? And I remember when I was in RGS and they would tell us this all the time, like, you guys are the future, you guys are the future. And I remember at that time I was always like, okay, yeah, but it's true, guys. I mean, we're here now looking at you and I really feel that. And so, and from the questions that are being asked, I can tell that you guys also care. You really want to know, do these things matter? Do you actually believe what you say? Do you really care about these things? And I think it's great. I just really applaud you for asking these questions. So keep asking the questions, keep getting educated, keep being aware. The fact that you chose to come to this event today is also amazing. So I think that's just really great.
Florence?
Yeah, I just want to highlight that actually our job is to make Kampung Kakis redundant. Because I think sometimes people talk about volunteering and everything else. Sometimes I do question, okay, the motivation behind it. Is it to beef up the CV so that I can get a better job, I can get into the university? What's the motivation behind it? And I'm not too sure whether I agree with the statement that we have to love ourselves first. I think the problem is, okay, nowadays we are told to love ourselves too much that we do not love others. We have no time even for our parents, for our siblings. So if you have no time for your parents, no time for your siblings, how do you, but yet you're volunteering outside. Wow, something is not very right. So I would say, to everybody, okay, be contented. I mean, the rat race is so real. Okay, I mean, do we really need to work so hard to earn that million? And from that million, the 10 million, what are you going to do with it? And that is a problem because I think everybody is chasing dollar and cents and we are sacrificing so much on the human side of things that we are becoming like robots. And that's also the reason why I retire from the big firm.
Yeah, I think we talked about, I mean, that part of having empathy, right, for the communities that we live in. And now one of the questions was on, advice for the next generation, as they kind of embark on their careers and sort of, just chiming into what you said, as we think about our careers, a lot of people have been maybe very like say chasing certain titles, going for the best paying jobs, going for the most lucrative industries or prestigious industries. But clearly everybody is on this panel here because they are kind of doing something as sustainability. So maybe, can I just get some of you all to share like how do you all move into the sectors that you moved into?
Okay, maybe I'll start first. So Kampung Kakis is actually not my day job, right? I think this is just a passion project that grew really huge for me into a charity. In my day job, I'm actually in the fintech industry. I've been in the industry, close to a decade now. And the reason I got into my day job actually was because I came to understand the problem of financial inclusion. Right? I think for me, I really wanted to, graduate and work in a space where I think there is a long road ahead, where there are challenges that are not easy to solve. It's complex. I think that's what keeps me excited and challenging to go to work every day. But at the same time, there is a bigger purpose or, a bigger benefit to, the global world, right? So I think there's another way to think about, your day-to-day life as you move into the workforce as well. We are all very unique individuals. We have different buckets of our lives that we need to fill, right? For me, actually, like beyond just Kampung Kakis and working. I am actually a dance and yoga teacher as well. Like moving is very important for me. So I think it's important for you as an individual to identify what those buckets are. And don't forget to fill them. I think what I did early in my 20s is I focused a lot on like, climbing the career ladder, right? And then I forgot about, the other buckets that I actually have. And then when I went to Kampung Kakis, we spent the first few years really like, it's almost like a startup, right? So I invested a lot of my time in Kampung Kakis as well. And then I forgot to move. And that just doesn't make me a happy person and doesn't allow me to contribute even more than, the limited capacity that I have today. So I would just say that, if you know yourself, I think firstly reflect, understand yourself, what your buckets are, and then go out there and fill those buckets.
Thank you. I mean, just briefly, I guess for me, the short answer is curiosity. Yes. I mean, I moved into the sustainability space because I'm actually a scientist by training. But I thought that in terms, if we look at the impact that are required and the scale of change that is required to move the needle forward, it can most effectively be done by working with the intersection of public, private, and a non-profit sector. And based on my own experience, the most significant work I have been involved was really at the intersection of these spheres. It gets very interesting to get different perspectives and try to commonly solve big problems. At the end of the day, we may not come up with a perfect answer, but at least something that helps to move the needle forward in the right direction.
Always the gentleman. So I think you've heard about GIA, apart from Nong Sheri, right? What pushed me out from corporate was literally COVID. A lot of what I did when I was with a Boston private equity firm was fundraising. And as I approached a certain age, I also looked at the quality of life, whether I had time to spend with my loved ones. And I asked myself, when I turned 50, many years ago, what did I want to do that I never got to do? And that was actually trying to manage people and property with a purpose beyond profit. And so that's why I decided, let's start and let's see where I am. It's been 4 good years, no looking back. And thanks for this chance to share this message.
Brandon, maybe you want to comment, because we talked about moving from the dark side to the not so dark side.
Yes, the dark side. Look, I think for the RGS community, people in the audience, listening to the speakers earlier and the panelists, I hope they take away that there isn't one way to approach sustainability, and there isn't one career path to sustainability. I don't think anybody came and anointed anybody here and said, "Thou shalt be in sustainability." It all came to each person individually in their own time, and to manifest in their own way. I'm making amendments, atonement really, because I started my career in oil and gas. Yep. And ironically, we used, in the early days of climate finance, it was pretty much the Kyoto Protocol and CDM. That was the only way of bringing climate-based finance into that sector. And we ended up using high complexity oil and gas process technology to implement the first climate change projects in China. This is going back 15, 18 years. And yeah, that was the way I transitioned from the dark side to the green side, and been there ever since.
Thank you. Yeah, we're just going around because it's like maybe 1 minute each. Or your advice to RGS girls, and some anecdotes from your personal journey.
Yeah, I think that I would agree with what Brandon said, which is that there isn't one way to do sustainability. And as you can see from the panel today, it's about the perspective that you bring to in whatever space that you end up working in. And I will also encourage people not to think of sustainability as just a part of your work. I think that's also really important. But I would say that for the few RGS girls who are left in the audience, I would say actually to broaden your horizon at this point. Don't feel that you have to be focused on one specific area or one specific issue, because, and you probably hate hearing this, but you're still really young. And you have a lot to learn and a lot to see and a lot to experience. And honestly, the climate scientists here can probably tell you what the world is going to be look like in 20, 30 years, but I don't think they can tell you what our society is going to look like and what our economies are going to look like. And so I would encourage you to chart your own path, but the way to do that, in an informed way. So get educated, know what's happening, you know, and then know yourself, like May said. And I think you'll be able to find your own way. Yeah.
Thank you.
I think for me, it's that, to reiterate what some of the other panelists said, was that there isn't one particular topic or sector that is the sustainability, right? So, I mean, I think being, a conservation scientist and marine biologist, I may have been in the past conceited enough to say that, we are the sustainability, right? But I think what I've realized, having grown up and removing some of that hubris, is that we're not doing this, we're doing this really for communities, right? So I'm a bit sad that we didn't manage to touch more on that. And for me, it's really about making the lives of people who rely on these coastal habitats and small island nations that are drowning because sea level has risen 20 centimeters and communities that are suffering because there's like increased storms and all these impacts from climate change. I think for me is like, how do we make their lives better? And we can't do this just one way. So we need the people to work in the socio-ecological space, the socio-ecological cultural space. We also need people in finance, to kind of redirect a lot of those subsidies that traditionally go towards oil and gas and all of that into a more positive space for us to build in. And also of course the scientists have to be there because otherwise I'll be out of a job. But I really like what May, you said about working yourself out of a job, right? Because I think that's what people in the conservation space need to do as well, right? We need to get to a point where conservation is just the conservation of nature and the protection of nature is just such a given that you don't even have to think twice about it, and I don't need to make infographics to tell people about how wonderful these ecosystems are. So yeah, that's my note. So you can come at this at different points, is what I'm trying to say. And in conservation, I like to say that, at least for Conservation International, which is a big international NGO, is that you don't have to be a scientist to contribute to conservation. We need people. I have colleagues who are in conservation finance. I have colleagues who are looking at communities and how they interact with conservation. And I have people who I need badly to help me communicate that, because as a scientist, I get stuck in my jargon. So,
thank you.
So I started my sustainability journey actually 15 years ago. That was when I founded Philanthropy Works. And at that time, the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, those colored things that you saw on screen earlier, they were sort of in the form of the Millennium Development Goals, not a direct successor, but focused on sustainable development. But I think a key turning point was actually in '97 with the Asia financial crisis, when I was still in school, but fortunately or unfortunately, well, fortunately, working at Morgan Stanley as an intern, doing Indonesian debt deals. And then we had basically, for the sake of the students, a crash in the capital markets. And that prompted a lot of reflection on my part on what is sustainable development going forward. And that made me decide to join the World Bank straight out of school, instead of returning immediately to investment banking, to corporate finance. You'll find your own journey. I just want to make a few points to offer for your consideration as we leave. One, sustainability is indeed difficult to, define. But there is one way to think about it. If everyone in the world lived the way you do, what does this world look like? Is that a better or worse world from now? Okay? Now, the phrase carbon budgets have not yet emerged so far today, which is quite surprising. Google that. The carbon budget for all of us, all of humanity, has halved in the few years of the pandemic. What that means is we cross a boundary in this decade, and every ton, every whatever quantum of carbon we use now, using up our budget, we're taking away from ourselves after this decade. We are also taking away from, for those who are parents, from your children, from their children. Every extra bit of carbon we consume in developed countries, in whatever segment of society you come from, we are taking away from the rest, in especially Africa, developing Asia, developing Latin America, who consume a lot less than us. The statistics just now on the top 1% and so on, yes, that is indeed true. They do consume more for a number of reasons. You can easily, search or ask, whatever AI you like on that. So you do need to, I think it would be helpful to check out carbon budgets as an individual and as a community. Planetary boundaries. Another key term that we are running into now, and I would strongly recommend that you understand what that means. And my final phrase to offer for you guys, donut economics. So I'm not endorsing it at this point, but the question that some of you guys raised on, economic models, check that out. It is food for thought.
Okay, so as the last word, I think the key word here is education. You need to educate yourself on the topic. The climate crisis is not going away. It will be there for the rest of your life. You need to educate yourself, because if you don't do that, you delegate decision-making power to other people. So you need to educate yourself. One of the reasons, so we have been hearing about sustainability now for many years, probably decades, but the reality is we are still at the very, very beginning of the journey. Our greenhouse gas emissions globally in the world are still increasing. We are 8 years after Paris Agreement. It's still increasing, 2% last year. So we are not going in the right direction. Mm-hmm. I believe that one reason is the gap of knowledge. Most people don't have enough knowledge, don't understand what is happening, including decision makers, business decision makers, political decision makers. If you want to make the right decisions, you need to have some data in mind. You need to have some order of scale in mind. You need to know how much emissions you are responsible for. Mm-hmm. Who in this room know how much carbon emission Singapore is emitting per year? Who knows how much, what is the average carbon footprint of a Singaporean? If you don't have this figure in mind, how can you make decisions?
Thank you, Dan. So I think the onus is on us, all of us, to educate ourselves. And Florence?
This is a difficult question for me because I did not go into sustainability. I think I made the confession just now that my journey was not into sustainability, it was into health. And then I discovered that sustainability is a means to an end. So what I want to encourage everybody is don't fall in love with sustainability. Don't do sustainability just because this is a flashy topic to be doing. Ask yourself, why are you here? What do you want to achieve with your sustainability? And make sure that this is a means to an end and not an end by itself.
Thank you, Florence. And with that as, good advice to end with. And thank you, panelists, all for the fruitful discussion. And thank you, audience, as well, for you guys who have stayed on. Apologies that we ran a little bit behind time, or 20 minutes behind time, actually. But thank you, everyone, for being with us today.
Thank you so much to all our panelists for staying on beyond our original time. I would like everyone to invite everyone to return to your seats, and I would like to invite Jeog back on stage to give the closing remarks. Thank you.
Thank you so much, dear panelists. Can you give them another round of applause, please? They did such a fine job discussing such a broad range of topics under sustainability. Like Florence said, we are the problem, right? We are the problem. But like the whole panelists and all the speakers said, we can also be the solution. Sustainability is a value-driven concept. Aligning our values with practices, be they personal, businesses, or non-profit, let's align our values with practices which has enduring legacy. Like Dan says, to do things that really matter, time with family, hobbies that emit less carbon. Let's be mindful and intentional in our practices to reduce carbon footprints. We all have a voice, we all have a choice, and we all have the power to make a difference. And the world is a better place because you and I are in it. So thank you very much for attending our conference. I would like to invite Mrs. Linda and the Board of Governors and RGS alumni to come to the stage. And as the tradition for all RWCs, we actually sing the school song. From high Olympus flows to us the glory, on us the sacred fire descends. Rise, sisters, rise, the world is all before ye. Fear not to grasp what fortune sends. Da, 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 da. Sisters in learning and sisters at heart, life lies before us, yes, luck to the start. A little while the sun shines high above us, and youth elixir fills our veins. The magic fire that moves the gods to love us, the fire by which the will attains. Da, 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 da. Sisters in learning and sisters at heart, life lies before us, is luck to the start. What up, Governor? So heart to heart will scale the heights of learning. No mean desires our days shall shame. Wholehearted true with pride and ardor burning, on sisters on to life and fame. Da, 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 da. Sisters in learning and sisters at heart, life lies before us, yes, luck to the start.